We're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gravity Max live stream. Today, we are talking about amendments to the U.S. Constitution, and I think it's going to be a pretty fun video. So there have been 27 amendments so far, and we're going to talk about them. So today we are joined by Zach. Hello, Zach.
Hey.
So Zach was here last time for the episode on the Constitution. So Zach, you are a veritable constitutional scholar, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, he is.
He's the expert.
He's the expert. He wrote it, you know.
I
Yep.
was there.
He was there. Yeah, so we're going to talk about that. Today we have an audio-only episode because Sebastian's camera isn't working, right?
Yeah, I'm getting a desktop camera eventually, but Discord on my phone is being
Yeah.
sus.
Yeah, so Seb's camera isn't working, and Zach, I don't know, Zach had something with his camera, so I just decided, yeah, I don't need to be the lone guy with a camera. Yeah, you're not really missing out on anything that looks particular. So, yeah, I have taken my hat off now, so my hair is quite expansive. So, let's just get started, right?
Let's jump right into it.
So let's start with the plugs, blah, blah, blah. This video is not intended for children under 13 years old. If you are under 13 years old, please do not watch this video, as the topics we discuss are meant for those with at least a high school level of education. If you are not 13, you will not understand the historic, legal topics discussed in this video. Not quite science today. But yeah, so don't watch it unless there's a constitutional amendment that says you can.
Exactly.
Which I doubt. So do not watch. So that's for the Federal Trade Commission. Okay. Visit the Gravity Max website at gravitymaxmedia.com. We have, things there. Let's see. I should probably put something up. I'm trying to remember. I kind of forget whether or not I have the book preview for my second book up there yet. But if I don't, that will be going up shortly, so check out the website. Also, visit the social media pages, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Links in the description. Yeah, if you like social media, then do that. Also follow Sebastian on social media and visit his YouTube channel, 128 Seconds, where he's got some pretty cool videos. Each is 128 seconds long, and they're educational, and so they explain things quickly. So if you need something explained quickly, go check it out. And yeah, he's also on social media.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so then, A Bottled Up Flame, second book, coming to Amazon November 1st. So, as I said, the book preview should be out pretty soon. We've already got the synopsis out. We've got the cover out. All I need is the preview, which is going to be like, I don't know, the first 6 or 7 pages of the book. I think I did that for Truly Dead Rock as well. So that'll be on the website at my next convenience. So you should check that out. And buy the book when it comes out. But yeah, so today, America's Patch Notes. So, the Constitution, you may have heard often, I feel like it's a bit of a cliche at this point to say, like, it's a living, breathing document or something like that. Like, I've heard that so many times, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But what that
like
really...
the mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell.
But what that really means by it, like, living, breathing document, what that really means, not to be so like airy or whatever, it just means that it can be changed. It was written to be changed, and it has been changed. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So the mode of getting a amendment to the Constitution passed. We talked about it in our Constitution episode. I think it's Article 5 of the Constitution describes how to do amendments.
I will check that. Jamie, pull that up.
Jamie, pull that up. Yeah, so either way, it's written into the Constitution. Like, here's how to update this. Um,
Yes,
so
that is correct. Article
all right.
5.
So the requirements are that an amendment. Well, to get an amendment, it either just has to be 3/4 of the states in a convention of states, like propose it and then pass it, or it can be just 2/3 of Congress propose it and then it needs to be ratified by 3/4 of the state. So either way, you need 3/4 of the states, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So because it's all about the states. That's like sort of how in constitutional time period, the states were more individual. I would say now they're more closely together, but it's really about the states. And so, what exactly does it mean by the states need to pass it? Well, the state legislature, uh, that's pretty much it. So, you might not think it's important or whatever. You go to the ballot box, you might just, vote for president or something. But you should actually vote in every election, in state elections, in, the midterm elections are pretty important too. Uh, and even local elections, for your school board and stuff. So it's always good to encourage a higher voter turnout. Although sometimes it can be difficult because I think Election Day is not a national holiday, which is a little strange, I'll admit. But anyway,
I'm checking that.
yeah, it's not. I know it's not. People
I
complain
think
about
it
that.
is. Yeah.
You could make an amendment.
Yeah, make an amendment.
Yeah, proposed amendment.
Yeah, people don't. Although they do give a day off school usually for
Well, that's because they use
Election
the
Day.
school as a polling place.
Okay. But yeah, if you're a worker at any other company, then no dice. You gotta ask for a day off. Hey, can I, exercise my right? Yeah, so that's a little strange. I don't know. Maybe we need to reshuffle the whole national holiday scheme. Because I feel like the argument would be if you make that a national holiday, our nation's GDP will go down by X%, from productivity loss. But I don't know. Maybe there's another holiday that is like outdated or something. But that is sort of off topic. I digress. Let's just get into these amendments.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we begin with the Bill of Rights.
Also known as the William of Rights.
The William of Rights. So,
Yes.
the Bill of Rights, using our patch notes analogy, the Bill of Rights is sort of like day one DLC for the Constitution. They, ratified the Constitution and passed it, but then pretty immediately, a few people were like, yeah, wait, I think we gotta add a few more things. So, this was, I think, James Madison was heavily involved in the writing of the Bill of Rights.
Yes. It was in order to appease the states that weren't necessarily going to ratify the Constitution. They needed to get the anti-federalists on their side for the most part, because there's a huge concern that the Constitution would allow for the abuse of power and for people's rights to be infringed on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the Bill of Rights was definitely a controversial addition. Like, many thought it unnecessary, including Hamilton. Hamilton did not really want the Bill of Rights. He thought that the Bill of Rights actually limited people's rights in some ways, and that government isn't supposed to interfere with the individual in the way that the Bill of Rights seems to claim that it does.
Interesting. So the unnecessary argument, is that just sort of like, oh, the voters are too smart to like pass something like a ban on free speech, you know what I mean? Yeah, I don't know, but I think the Bill of Rights is a pretty good thing. We've got some of the most known amendments, some of the most cited amendments are in the Bill of Rights. The later amendments, people don't like. The Bill of Rights, I think, gets a lot more attention when it comes to the amendments.
Yeah, definitely.
So I don't know. I would say they're pretty important.
For in middle, I can't remember for which grade, but in middle
Yeah.
school for social studies, we had to memorize the Bill of Rights
Yeah,
and
that's
not
true.
the rest of the
Yeah, not the
Constitution.
rest.
So there's definitely an emphasis on it in like education.
Yeah, definitely. So another thing about the Bill of Rights, we'll talk about this a bit later. But the Bill of Rights includes 10 amendments, but originally they wanted to include 12 amendments. However, two of them did not pass. So
The illegal amendments.
the dark amendments. So we will get to those later. But for now, let's begin with the First Amendment. The First Amendment, I'm just going to read it because it is, the text for most of these are pretty short. Congress shall make no law. Oh, sorry, thunder there. Let me start over. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people to peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So the five main things there are, assembly, religion, petition, press, speech. So yeah, so a lot of these, I mean, this is sort of, I don't know, like the foundation of America. You know what I mean? I feel like, in my opinion, I am the most, like, out of all the amendments, I see the First Amendment as the most important.
I feel like it's definitely the most cited, like the most
Yeah.
brought up in like court cases.
Yeah.
It's like the First Amendment, like people are like, you're infringing on my First Amendment rights. I feel like that this amendment more than any other amendment is brought up in like judicial cases.
Yeah.
I think this amendment basically ensures that America is really a democracy because it protects all of the ways that you can exercise your beliefs. Definitely. I also think this amendment is kind of unfortunately a difficult amendment in terms of situation today because the right to assemble and I think freedom of religion from interfering in government or separation of church and state are not really happening right now. Either of those things.
That's fair.
So
yeah. Well, I guess there's that's why we have the judicial branch for lawsuits to come up. But yeah, this is definitely this is like my favorite. I mean, that's kind of weird to say. Oh, my favorite amendment, but I am very strong on the First Amendment. But yeah, so I mean, this is sort of self-explanatory, I guess. So a lot of nations have like the nation's newspaper. Like I think
I'm gonna close my window because there are children screaming outside.
Yeah, unfortunately, I am like sitting underneath a large tea cell, and now it's raining. So we're gonna have to bear through that. I'll talk louder, I guess. So, but yeah, so a lot of nations have, not a lot, I don't know. I don't know the number, but there are nations that have like the national newspaper where the government is sort of in charge of the newspaper. Like the USSR, I think what was it called, like Pravda or something? Like they had their national newspaper. And so it's interesting because the press is often called the fourth estate. And what that means is that's a reference to the three other estates, which is the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. So it's often said the press is the fourth branch, the fourth estate. And what people mean by that is that the press is supposed to sort of call out when the government's shady. I mean, think of how many like big exposés there have been where like a journalist has like figured out like some big government conspiracy and then they like announce it, sort of like whistleblowers and stuff. So I think it's pretty important to have freedom of the press just to sort of keep the government in check, to make sure corruption isn't happening. But then again, it also, there's just also other things like the press isn't always doing exposés on the government. Sometimes it's just like, hey, something happened, right? I mean, that's the way the news is supposed to go. And so freedom of the press, not just for calling out the government, but for having just stories, I guess, unbiased and stuff. I think that's important because, say, I think if it was just government run newspapers and say there was a murder or something and it like wasn't helpful to the government's like whole agenda or whatever, they wouldn't report on it. So it's important to have the press independent from the government. And then, yeah, freedom of speech is a very important one. And it's surprisingly like in even like European countries, they have very nearly freedom of speech, but like not quite. Like I believe in Britain, there have been a few instances in the past like few years where people have been fined for things they said online, which is sort of frightening. Like that can't happen in America because of the First Amendment. You can't fine someone for saying something. You can still say, get them like fired essentially, if people get mad at them, right? But the government itself cannot take legal action against someone for speaking, as long as it's not a direct, incitation of violence.
Yeah, hate and speech and all that.
But some corporations can take action against a person.
Yeah.
If that person is using their platform, they're not protected always by the First Amendment.
Yeah, that's true. There's a big, like Twitter, they've had a problem recently. And so this is like a law. This is not an amendment. It's like Section 230, I believe, where it says, it's just a mess. It's basically that the problem with corporations being able to like censor some speech is that if they do so, they need to take on the responsibility of a publisher. And so that's been like a lawsuit recently, or just a controversy, is that if you as a company decide to censor speech, then if someone says something that could be counted, oh geez, the thunder is getting really intense. I'm sorry if this is interrupting things.
It's not too loud.
Okay. But basically, if you censor speech on your online platform, right, and then someone says something libelous and you don't censor it, then you personally can be sued for libel rather than the person who said it. Whereas now
we have some chat from the legend himself, and he's saying some crazy things. He or she, we don't know.
Stop it! Yeah, I do not know. Here, shoot. Here, wait. Can you read out the chat? I do not have it.
Sure. Stop it says First Amendment should be abolished.
Okay.
He also said, or he or she also says, Americans are known for their intelligence. They don't need these quote-unquote rights. American democracy is overrated. America should secede from America and join Europe.
All right. So I guess, is Stop It European? I feel like that's what
we need to find their origins.
This man or woman.
They could very well be the villain of season 4 of the Gravity Max.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm like, if they're in Europe, then it's got to be pretty late there. It's got to be like 10 p.m., maybe 9 p.m. Right. So thanks for the dedication, I guess. But anyway, as I was saying, basically the law says that if you're going to censor speech, then you become responsible for like literally everything said on the platform. And if Twitter was responsible for literally every tweet, that would not be good for Twitter. You know what I mean? Yeah, people say some pretty interesting things on Twitter. So basically the argument is that if Twitter wants to keep their protections, whereas currently if you say something libelous in a tweet, you're going to get sued, not Twitter. But if Twitter continues to censor things and the government, like if there's a lawsuit filed, then they could lose their protections. So that's been basically a controversy recently. But yeah, and then freedom of religion, that's pretty simple too. It's like the no prayer in school, or no mandatory prayer in school. If you want to do that, you can on your own. But that's that. That's the First Amendment. Lots of stuff with the First Amendment. Very valuable. So yeah. Anything else you guys have to say?
First Amendment, pretty pog.
Zach?
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought. Yeah.
think I'm good with this one.
Okay.
Let's move on.
All right, let's move on. So now we got the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, I will read it off for you guys, but also a very cited amendment. Let me just read it. Okay. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So that is the Second Amendment. So that is about firearms, guns. I don't know which words YouTube likes, but I'm not too, you know what I mean? I don't know which words YouTube likes me to say and not say. But
well, in the Constitution, it says the right to bear arms, so I guess we could call them arms.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? My rationale is you can't be demonetized if you're not monetized in the first place.
There you go.
I don't really care. But yeah, so I would say the Second Amendment is, I would say, pretty unique to America. Not many other countries really just allow people to get firearms. I think like Japan, you're not allowed to get firearms. I believe Britain as well. And I imagine
Britain is really big on its
many
ban
European countries. Many European countries.
Well, in a lot of countries you can still get them. It's
Okay.
just that you have to you have to have some circumstance in which you would need them.
Well, I imagine it's like I thought in Japan at least it was like you have to be law enforcement.
Yeah.
Like civilian.
The UK law is that any person possessing a firearm in the UK must possess a shotgun certificate or a firearm certificate.
Oh, okay.
So it's the Brits and their licenses.
License.
But
Yeah.
machine guns, pepper spray, semi-automatic and pump-action rifles, and any firearm that has a barrel less than 30 centimeters in length are prohibited.
Huh. That's interesting.
So
about
as well as
pepper
automatic
spray.
rifles. Yeah,
Well,
that's a little strange.
Yeah, but yeah, we're getting a bit specifics here. Let's just try to zoom out to the general, and then we can get into the specifics. So yeah, I think, well, Americans and guns. I mean, I feel like it's a bit of a stereotype, but I would say, you know, you got to apply the 80-20 rule. I assume that, you know, 80% of the guns in America are likely owned by 20% of the people. Because I think I think on average there's more guns than people in America, but you also have to consider that it's probably a ton of people that own no guns and then a few that own many.
I think the rate in the United States is 120 guns for every 100 residents.
Oh, that's up. I thought it was 108 over 100.
2 people. Let me check.
But yeah, so the Second Amendment, I think, was sort of written in a time where they were concerned about like the invasion, like from Britain, you know, because a lot of the American, like the Revolutionary War,
120 guns per 100 people.
A lot of the Revolutionary War was fought like by militias. You know, America didn't have a formal military because they were a British colony. You know, and why would a colony need a formal military? So they only
under the Congress of once they declared independence, they basically took all of the state militias and other forces and combined them.
Yeah,
but
and they turned it into...
It was still important for the state militias to exist in the first place.
Yeah, so they started out with militias, and that became the U.S., like the original army, or the original military was formed from these militias. So that's why the amendment says, for the purpose of maintaining a militia, is there the right to bear arms. And then also, I guess it's sort of about, government tyranny. I've heard that a lot. Although, you know, there's not much a citizen can do against the U.S. military. There's not much really any country can do at this point against the U.S. military, just because of all our spending in tech. But I think there's an argument to be made there. Also, they say self-defense as well. There are a lot of purposes for the Second Amendment, but it's also come under fire, I guess, to use no pun intended, the Second Amendment, because people have criticized that it's too easy to get a gun in America. And compared to other countries around the world, like that argument is pretty understandable. Um, but yeah, so this has been linked, I guess. I think arguments like this have become increasingly common with the rise of like mass shootings in America. People have been getting more invested in this issue on one side or another. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I'm trying not to take sides here. I'm neutral. Switzerland over here. So I'm just informing you what's up, guys. So yeah, so people have been saying, I think what, like semi-automatic weapons, uh, people want like bans on those. AR-15s particularly, AR-15 I think has been the like word. Like it is like if you were to do like a search, I would say, of like news and opinion articles and just count the number of times AR-15 is said, it is said a lot. I don't know how many like types of guns there are, but like is there like, say, an AR-16, right? That I don't know why people are obsessed
Um,
specifically on this one, you know what I mean?
you know, the
Like I feel like
the
it'd be smarter to
AR-15.
say a
Yeah.
broader sort of definition or whatever.
So the AR-15. The reason why that's a specific one that's under
Hmm.
fire is that it is a semi-automatic rifle,
Hmm.
but it that specific gun, that specific model has been used in a lot of school shootings.
Okay.
Like it's that model over any other model of
Hmm.
gun in recent years.
Hmm.
But it's not an automatic rifle because
Yeah,
those are
those are
illegal,
illegal. Yeah.
except for the military. A lot of people think that the AR in AR-15 stands for automatic rifle, but
Oh,
it
okay.
stands for the makers of the gun.
Hmm.
I forget what the actual AR stands for, but it's like the
Yeah.
guy's name.
Huh.
But that's the reason why it's under fire, and it also holds. I'm pretty sure it's 30 rounds to a magazine,
Okay.
which some people think is an excessive amount
Okay. Yeah.
magazine.
So
I
that's interesting because there have been a lot of laws proposed recently on like, restricting access to firearms, but that is like, it comes in conflict, obviously, with the
Yeah,
Second
30.
Amendment. But, we have things like fully automatic rifles are already banned, so it's a question of where do people draw the line. And so that's kind of interesting with the whole like Second Amendment. You have to sort of thread, between what is constitutional and what is unconstitutional. Um,
Mm.
and particular states have issued their own like statewide gun laws. I'm pretty sure California, I'm just guessing here, but California, I would presume, New York, Illinois, I believe, is a pretty, like all these states are fairly really like heavy on gun laws. But the problem is, people want more. Well, some people want more national gun laws because, say, Illinois has more restrictive gun laws than Indiana, right? And so there's a lot of gun crime in Chicago. And so people say, why is this? And Chicago is only like half an hour away from Indiana. You know what I mean? So a
Mm-hmm.
problem is that people will go over to Indiana with its less restrictive laws and then come back to Chicago. So that's why people have been arguing for a more national approach to this issue, because statewide can work, but not completely. Also, you end up with issues like people have been arguing from the other direction about there needs to be national consensus on this because there have been stories where like someone legally purchases a firearm like in their home state and then they go on a road trip and they pass through like Illinois and then they get arrested and like sentenced for having an illegal gun in Illinois when they were only passing through. And so that's like an issue. So it's all a bit of a mess, a complicated issue right now. Um, but I think both sides would probably agree on the fact that there needs to be more of a national consensus, I would say, because the state by state thing is leading to problems on both sides. What do you think?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, it definitely needs to just be like one federal
Yeah.
thing and just established, and so
Yeah.
it's the same in every state.
Yeah, which
And
is
I
interesting.
think if you're
Oh,
going to
go ahead.
look at whether or not it's constitutional,
Mhm.
like the regulation of firearms specifically, I think you have to admit that the Second Amendment is often misinterpreted because the founders did not necessarily intend for every citizen to be able to carry an arm unconnected with their service in a militia. And because of this one Supreme Court case in 2008, which was the District of Columbia versus Heller,
Okay.
they ruled that basically the Second Amendment guarantees the individual right to keep and bear arms, regardless of whether or not you're in the militia, just
Okay.
for the purpose of self-defense. And that a specific ban in the District of
Mhm.
Columbia was unconstitutional.
Interesting.
Yeah. We have some chat from Jacob. You want me
Oh
to
yeah,
read it out?
just read it.
From Daikaiju Productions. He says, this is in response to, we were talking about gun laws in different countries. He says, it's pretty much just Czechia, Estonia, and Poland that allows CCW in Europe, which is concealed carry weapons
okay.
in Europe. All of them require a license to own.
Yeah, the Eastern European nations, I think, recently or just in general, sort of, have been interestingly more right-leaning because of the fact that they used to be part of the USSR. And you know how well that turned out, essentially. So they're sort of responding to that with their politics going in the other direction, which is interesting. So that would make sense. Interesting. But yeah, so definitely a controversial issue. People always say, 2A or whatever. Like, again, these are very often cited. You know what I mean? Like, everything here, like the Bill of Rights is pretty, expansive. But that's all I have to say. That's all I have to say about the Second Amendment. You guys have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, it's definitely a highly. There's a lot of contention around it. There's a lot of debate and discussion about it, and I think it's important to realize that like it hasn't changed since like they wrote it.
Yeah.
Like there have been court cases on it and stuff, but like a big argument for to restrict guns to further extent is that the like I said earlier, an AR-15 holds 30 rounds. If you really want to get funky, you can get ones that hold about 40, but that's per magazine, so each clip that you put into an AR-15 is 30 rounds, so 30 shots. And the founding fathers wrote the Second Amendment when they had one-shot bolt-action rifles that took a minute and a half to reload. You had to clean the powder out, and you had to buy your bullets from a silversmith who lived in Massachusetts. There's approximately 3 in the entire country, so there's all that. I don't think revolvers even existed at that point. I don't think they had 6-shot revolvers. I could be wrong about that.
I think you're correct. Yeah.
They did not know. Well, they might have foreseen what it was, but they obviously weren't going to restrict guns at that point in time.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, that's really interesting because you've actually handled a gun, right?
Yes, I have fired an AR-15.
Oh, interesting.
As well as plenty of other weapons. So, and the reason why I have and why I still do advocate for restrictions on guns is I did want to familiarize myself with what they actually are. you
Yeah,
know.
to have an informed opinion, you sort of have to like
Exactly.
know what's up. That makes sense.
Yeah,
So
because that's a big issue with
yeah.
a lot of the people that want to restrict guns have never handled a gun, you
Hmm.
know, and it's a big difference in philosophy
Hmm.
because the way I was taught, the way I was brought up was that a gun is nothing more than a tool, but
Hmm.
some people see it as nothing more than a weapon,
That's interesting.
and it's just a big flaw. It is technically both, but it's just
Hmm.
a different way of processing what it is in your mind.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I do have an informed opinion on that,
Yeah, definitely.
and I can definitely see why people want guns for protection. But personally, like 30 rounds per magazine, like unless the entire government is coming after you or we're
Uh-huh.
getting invaded, like swarmed by hordes of zombies,
Hmm.
like I could
Yeah.
see you pissing off like 12 people max,
Yeah.
and so that's 2 rounds from
Yeah.
a pistol, but it should
Yeah.
never even come to that in the first place. Like
Yeah,
that's such an
exactly.
extreme example.
Yeah.
But I would recommend that you do familiarize yourself with stuff that you're trying to debate about because
Definitely.
an
Yeah.
informed position is the strongest position you can have.
That's a really good point because I've heard criticism where people have said a lot of the gun bans are sort of just like scary looking guns, but like functionally it's not actually like the case, and so people are just sort of making more emotional uh, like designations than like sort of factual ones. So
Yeah.
I've heard that criticism, which is so it's interesting that you've actually like had some firsthand experience. Um, so I would defer to you essentially on this issue because
Yeah.
I do not know. Um, but yeah,
Gun
so
stream.
Gravity Max Guns. That would be an interesting episode. The science. Uh,
Oh yeah, I have made bullets,
oh
so
wow.
there is that. Ballistics.
Oh.
I've been taught in the science of ballistics,
Hmm.
measuring out gunpowder, what kind of bullets to use, the different measurements. Like when someone says .357 Magnum, like what does that point refer
Yeah.
to? And it's the width of the
Huh.
actual bullet. Like what is a
Yeah.
bullet? Because there's a difference between the bullet, the cartridge, the primer, the everything.
Yeah. That actually does sound like a good episode now that you mention it.
Yeah, it's not bad.
I think I'm going to have to put that on our potential topics list.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's all for the Second Amendment, unless Zach has anything that he'd like to add.
I think we pretty much
All right.
covered it.
Yeah, all right. So let's move on to the Third Amendment. The Third Amendment: no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. So this is the no quartering of soldiers thing, like you might have heard that phrase. Um, Now this was an amendment because, as you can see in this picture, the redcoats, they would come into people's houses in America, like during, well, even before the Revolutionary period. It was one of the intolerable acts, but they would basically come in and just be like, "Hey, we got to stay here. You have an extra room? Oh, you don't? All right, you'll be sleeping outside then." Like they would just come in, sort of commandeer, sort of like how in cop shows sometimes you'll see, "I commandeer this vehicle." No, I commandeer this entire frickin' house. So they just,
We have some chat from Andre.
all right.
He says S plus tier title. So he's complimenting us on
Thank you.
America's patch notes
Thank you.
as a title. Thank you, Andre.
Yeah. But yeah, so this was an intolerable act, and I mean, it sort of hasn't been relevant, since the 1700s, because that's not really a thing that people would think to do, like put soldiers in someone's house unofficially.
Yeah.
So that doesn't really come up anymore, but it's important that it's there, I guess. Um, So yeah, but it's I would say an overshadowed amendment because no one ever really needs to cite the Third Amendment because when has this or will this ever really happen? You know what I mean?
Here, yeah, I want to see if the Third Amendment has ever been brought up in a court case.
It
Yeah.
has been up in a in like a Second Circuit case. I don't think it's ever been. It's never been the basis for a Supreme Court decision.
Okay.
But I remember there's this one whack case in Connecticut of all places where they're talking about like people's right to purchase like contraceptives,
Mhm.
and some crazy lawyer decided to cite the Third Amendment as implying the belief that the individual's home should be free from agents of the state.
Okay.
So
Oh
you should
my
be
God.
able to have contraceptives. Otherwise, you got like the government in your house, you know?
Huh. That is
But
pretty random.
it's a wacky, very strange.
That lawyer, did he win?
Let me check. I actually don't know.
That feels
'Cause
like
if
such
he
a
won,
sideways application, yeah.
The
Yeah,
case was
that's-
Griswold versus Connecticut.
Griswold. Interesting. But yeah, I don't really have as much to say about this one because it isn't really as
Yeah, definitely
relevant.
not.
But I would say it's a good thing that the government can't just sort of use your house as barracks whenever they deem necessary. I think that's pretty important that we have that as an amendment to the Constitution, because I can't imagine that would be very fun.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, he won.
He
Griswold
won.
won that
Nice.
case.
Legend Griswold and his lawyer.
That is nuts.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, this was I think this was in the Declaration of Independence, right? Because the Intolerable Acts were part of that. I believe it was part of the Declaration of Independence where they said, like, oh, Britain, here's a list of things we hate about you. And one of them was, like, you force, your soldiers into houses. So,
Yeah.
considering that it made it into the Declaration of Independence, it sort of makes sense that it would also make its way into the Constitution through an amendment.
I don't really have a problem with it, like, being there. I think it's kind of like a test.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, it will never be used.
Yeah.
Like, in today's
But
thing,
it'll never
but I
be
think-
used because it was there, is the way I see it, No one would
Yeah.
think to violate the Third Amendment at this point because it's been there for so long.
Exactly. And
It's
it's
like
not
it's
hurting
done its-
anyone.
Yeah. It's like it's done its job.
Yeah.
But yeah. But it is interesting, though, because America, just as a nation, like recently, really doesn't have to face domestic threats from abroad as much. So like in World War I and World War II, if you were living in France, like the battle was happening in France. But like other than, say, like Pearl Harbor or like the Lusitania, like these things, even for most Americans, could feel pretty distant. So America sort of has the luxury of being an ocean away from all of its enemies. So it doesn't have to, other than Venezuela, I guess, is connected by land. Well, the Panama Canal. But never mind. So we don't really have to think about this in the first place because there isn't really much of a strategic position within the country when it comes to fighting a war. That's sort of what I was trying to say. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
like, unless you own property like in Afghanistan, and that might not even be subject like to U.S. jurisdiction, even if you are a U.S. citizen that owns it. So it's just sort of like this amendment is so like it's important, but it's just so like there's no real conceivable situation where like what it was trying to prevent would really occur is what I'm trying to hammer home essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, unless you guys have anything else to say about this one, I will move on.
I think we're good.
All right.
Mhm.
So next we got the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So this is where if you watch like detective shows, when like the uncooperative one that feels like like that they're the one who committed the crime says like, oh, go away, like come back with a warrant, and then they come back with a warrant, you know. um I'm just saying because I feel like that scenario has been used a dozen times in TV.
Yes.
Yes.
Just detective shows. I like a good detective show, but it's just funny to point out that they have a lot of tropes. So one of them is the search warrant, and the search warrant is a result of the Fourth Amendment. Um, so it's like the police can't just say, "Yeah, let's just bust down this guy's door." Whenever they feel like it, they sort of have to get a warrant. I mean, it's pretty basic stuff, but it is pretty important because if we didn't have this, like, you wouldn't really have privacy. You know what I mean? You'd just be subject to any intrusion. You know,
Yeah.
so it's pretty important to have this. Like houses and cars as well. You need a warrant. Um, But often I believe they can sort of snoop around the outside and look through the windows, law enforcement. I don't think they need a warrant for that, but they need a warrant to enter, like search through your things. And I would say this is a pretty good law because, you know, they have to have a reason. You don't want just some vindictive law enforcement person to just go into your house for no reason just because they can. It's pretty important that we have this in the U.S. Um, and I'm trying to think of like applications of this. Well, it's interesting because with stuff like video and audio, like surveillance technology, the sort of like warrants involved there have become interesting as well because it's like I'm pretty sure you can't record someone unless you tell them they're being recorded or unless they're in a place like a public place where there's no assumption of privacy. But it's like you can't just bug someone's house essentially. You need a warrant for that. Even if they like let you into their house and then you covertly like place microphones there while like they're in the bathroom or something. Like you can't do that. You need a warrant to bug someone's house. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah. So there have been, I think, a lot. I mean, if you think of like the Watergate tapes and stuff like that, um, there have been a lot of situations in recent history where things have been recorded illegally and people have gotten in trouble. So make sure to get your warrants. Then other interesting things are like the National Security Agency. People have scrutinized the National Security Agency for its like I don't want to say spying, but I can't think of another word. So spying. They're spying on people's like phones and internet stuff. So like your personal electronic devices and I think the law is currently like I don't think personal electronic devices are actually protected by warrant because the internet is so new, essentially. Um, so I don't think do you actually need a warrant as law enforcement to go through someone's texts and stuff? Texts. I believe.
Yeah, I think you would because
Okay.
Not
Okay.
it
in
counts.
certain situations. Like a lot of
Yeah.
people think that the Fourth Amendment protects them from being searched while at
Uh-huh.
school or something like
Oh,
that.
okay.
But that is
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
the case.
That's
Yeah,
untrue.
that's not true. Yeah.
You're
You
not on your own property.
you have no rights in school.
Yeah. Another thing about the Fourth Amendment is what is the reasonable suspicion that a
Mhm.
crime has been or is being or will be committed.
Yeah.
Like with stop and frisk, which
Mhm.
originated in 1968 from the Supreme Court case Terry versus Ohio.
Mhm.
Well, I guess it didn't really originate then. That's when they were ruled constitutional as long as it
I thought it
still
was
connects back to a reasonable suspicion.
thought it was used pretty prominently in New York City.
Yeah. But the practice of searching and patting people down is pretty old, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
but
true.
it's kind of hard to say like what counts as a reasonable suspicion of a dangerous suspect.
That's true. Yeah. But yeah,
we have some more chat.
Oh yeah, read it
if you want me to read it out. All right. Jacob says, I think Griswold won on the Fourth Amendment.
Oh. That would make sense. Yeah.
Then Stop It says, I intend on using your houses as barracks. So they're really leaning into this villain role.
Yeah, definitely.
And then Jacob clarifies, he says, it became the base of Roe v. Wade. And then he says, never mind, it's first, third, fourth, and fifth.
It was basically the language that the Constitution suggested that there was some privacy within your household. So.
I just wanted to go back to the NSA thing quickly. I believe the designation is that if it's like for hunting down terrorists, essentially, when it comes to personal electronic devices, the Fourth Amendment sort of goes out the window when it's about terrorism. Because they have totally done just like there have been, since 9/11, a lot of sort of mass online surveillance type stuff that people have gotten upset about, and it's usually in the name of counterterrorism. So that's sort of like a loophole type thing. So the Fourth Amendment is an interesting one, and it's especially interesting because when it was first written, being searched really meant being searched. People entering your house and searching it. But now there are so many other ways that people leave footprints that can be sort of searched, and people might not be so comfortable with it. Especially with the internet, there's a lot of like online privacy concerns, and not just from the government, from like corporations and stuff as well. People get concerned about online privacy. So it's interesting how we're gonna like sort of like trying to adapt the current sort of framework of U.S. law to the new technology of the internet is pretty interesting. I think internet law particularly, I would say when it comes to just fields of law, internet law has got to be one of the worst. Internet law is just very maybe it's only because I notice it so much because I'm on the internet a lot, but to me, out of all the laws I sort of see, internet law just seems horribly underdeveloped and
I think
poorly thought out.
There's an explanation for that. I would say like almost all law is based on like stare decisis, and they just like let the previous rulings tell them what to do. Yeah. But with the internet, it was like such a new invention. They didn't have any precedents to go off of, and a lot of previous security like rulings didn't really apply because the internet is so different from any other mode of communication.
Yeah, it's just so new and so different that that makes sense. That sort of,
and they didn't actually like sit down to think of a system that would evolve with the internet, because the internet also changed so much.
That's true.
In the past 20 years. So.
Yeah. The law has tended to be reactive, I guess you could say, instead of proactive. But so that's the Fourth Amendment. I don't really have much else to say on that.
Yeah, it's pretty important. Gives us a lot of good cop shows.
Yeah, definitely. They're like, oh, you need a warrant. And then the loose cannon one goes in anyway. And it's like, look, this guy's a murderer. And then the, like, boss that's like...
He's like, we do this by the book.
Yeah, we do this by the book. Yeah. Anyways, too many cop shows. Too many detective shows.
Too many.
So, that's the Fourth Amendment. Let's go to the next one. And this next one, the Fifth Amendment, also used quite a bit in cop shows. But let me just read it first. So, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Bit of a long one there. But some key takeaways, right? Life, liberty, and property. People always say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but that's just the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence isn't really U.S. law, you know what I mean? Although it's important. But here in the Fifth Amendment, we actually have the life, liberty, and property, which life, liberty, and property is actually the original one from John Locke. But the Declaration of Independence changed it to happiness, but the Constitution brought it back to property, because I guess it's difficult to deprive someone of happiness. I don't know. Like, that's sort of a hard legal precedent to say. The government made me sad. I'm being repressed. You know what I mean? Like, that's sort of difficult to prove. You know, difficult to base laws off of. So it's interesting that they changed it to property. Also,
I think it also had to do with slavery.
That's true.
Like, it's interesting how the Declaration of Independence totally avoids slavery, whereas the Constitution, like, it tries really hard to avoid slavery, but it doesn't, because it has like the 3/5 clause. And
yeah,
I mean, you can avoid using the word slavery, but slavery is still a part of it. So.
Yeah, we talked about that in that episode. But yeah, the Declaration of Independence, actually, there was a paragraph in it that they removed that denounced slavery. They removed it, otherwise, like, North Carolina, South Carolina, the southern states would not sign on, and they needed unanimous support for the Declaration of Independence for it to actually be sent to Britain. So yeah, so Thomas Jefferson, who's also was sort of hypocritical because he also owned slaves when he wrote this, and he denounced slavery in his Declaration of Independence, which is strange to say the least. But then they had to remove it in the editing phase, otherwise the other states wouldn't send it. So that's definitely an interesting issue. But yeah, for the Fifth Amendment in particular, this is where you get the I plead the fifth thing, which is basically saying you can't be forced to be a witness against yourself. And that really makes sense, because say that you commit a crime, right? Say that you, like, steal $100, okay? If you steal $100 and then they ask you under oath, did you steal $100? Well, obviously you're going to say no, right? But then if they proved that you did steal those $100, could they charge you twice for lying under oath? That's sort of like, that's one of the things they were trying to prevent there. Because obviously, if you are in a criminal proceeding and you plead not guilty, if they ask you, did you do it, you're obviously going to say, no, I did not do it. You know? And so, sort of to prevent this double charging effect is part of the Fifth Amendment. But that's always, like, another thing in cop shows where they go, you have the right to remain silent. Which is, yeah, they always say that. You might have, that phrase is just so freaking common. But yeah, so that's the Fifth Amendment. I think is
also good for cop shows.
Also good for cop shows, yeah. Also pretty important, definitely. There's some other stuff in there too. But yeah, Zach, do you have anything else you'd like to add to what we've been saying? Amendment?
No, I think that's pretty much it for the fifth.
Yeah, so fifth. Remember, keep quiet and plead the fifth. Anyway, so Sixth Amendment. So the Sixth Amendment. Let me read it for you. All right. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. So there's a lot of things there that you see again, like 4th through 6th, maybe even 7th, I believe. It's all like cop detective dramas. Can give you a pretty good sense for these, but there's a lot of important stuff in there. One is, trial by a jury of your peers. That is pretty important because in other nations, people are often, they're both sentenced and like the verdict is both given by judges. And, if the judge is like a corrupt official, that isn't good. But if you just have 12 average citizens, that leads to less bias. And that's actually an instance where demarchy, I've talked about demarchy before. Demarchy is used in the US for the jury selection process. It's random. But also the Sixth Amendment is where, if you've ever heard of, I think we talked about it before, right? The Yellowstone death zone. I think we talked about that just 2 weeks ago. What was that episode 2 weeks ago?
Here, I could check.
I think we were talking about it when we were looking at the amendments creating.
Yeah, I think it might have been off stream.
Like you have to be tried in the state.
True. We just talked about it off stream. Okay. But yeah, so this is basically this like 50 miles squared like strip of Yellowstone National Park, and so most of Yellowstone is in Wyoming, but this little strip veers into Idaho, but it's part of the Yellowstone Federal District because it's federal land. So it's part of the Yellowstone Federal District, but it's part of Idaho. And nobody lives in this section. So if you were to try to find a jury from both the district and state wherein the crime shall have been committed, you're not going to find anyone. So hypothetically, if you were to commit a crime in this place, in this like death zone, Yellowstone death zone, could you just get away with it because they wouldn't be able to prosecute you without like violating the Sixth Amendment? That's an interesting thing. It hasn't really come up yet, but I hope it kind of does come up. That would be an interesting legal battle. And I don't necessarily mean like some horrible crime, but I would like to see somebody say, sell illegal Disney merch, right? Copyright infringement. Let's see someone infringe copyright in the middle of Yellowstone National Park and see what happens when they get arrested. But anyway, so that's just part of it. So trial by a jury of your peers, very important. There's also impartial jury. So that's why if you are an adult and have been called in for jury duty, they ask you questions beforehand, and you might have gotten rejected for knowing the person, But yeah, so then also other things is that when people say you have the right to an attorney, that comes from the Sixth Amendment. Assistance of counsel for defense. If that's in cop shows, they always say, oh, you get an attorney or whatever, or when they're interrogating someone and they're like, I'm not saying anything until I get to speak to my lawyer, or whatever. They say that a lot in cop shows, Then what else? Also, just sort of the public trial and like that someone should face their accusers, essentially, I would say is pretty important. Otherwise, someone could just sort of anonymously accuse someone of a crime, and then when it goes to trial, it's just like, what? I think that's a pretty important aspect too. Like, if you're gonna accuse someone of a crime, you sort of have to stand you have to stand there. You gotta, I don't know. I think it's sort of because how with the internet, anonymity has led people to just sort of be horrible.
Yeah.
I think they sort of recognize this when writing the Sixth Amendment, and that's why they said the witnesses, the accusers, they have to be there face to face. Otherwise, they might just say whatever. So I think
did Zoom court violate the Sixth Amendment? Then?
Zoom court by Zoom. That's interesting.
I think my problem with the Sixth Amendment is that trial by jury is extremely the jury is basically controlled to only represent a specific group of people. Because lawyers can basically throw out anyone they want for whatever reason. They don't really have to give a clear reason. Like, I think John Oliver was mentioning some of the stupid reasons why people get thrown out of juries. It can be like for wearing a red scarf or something like that.
Well,
but anyway,
the important part is that both the prosecution and the defense have to agree on the jury.
Yeah.
So that at least means that, like, prosecution can't just, like, make the jury entirely just, like, bloodthirsty, you know?
Well, that's true, but a lot of the time, the juries are not representative of minorities in the way that they should be if it was proportional. And another thing about trial by jury is, I think it's a mistake for the only legal case to not have a trial by jury is impeachment.
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting. I don't know if this is necessarily a good idea, but to have impeachment trial also by jury and not by the Senate.
Yeah, I think we talked about that.
In the Constitution episode, we definitely did.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's kind of good that it allows the government, the different branches, to check themselves. Although, yeah, if the entire government is corrupt, I mean, I think the problem there is you shouldn't have elected corrupt people. But that's kind of hard to argue, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know. Because if just 12 random people, it's just a problem of, like, especially nowadays, I feel like it would be very hard to find impartial people. Not just with this president. I mean, like, if it were to be the past few presidents, I think things have gotten increasingly hyperpartisan. I think we talked about that in some episode. Things have gotten increasingly hyperpartisan, and going forward, I doubt that will change. You know, that's probably just going to get worse. So I think it would be hard. Like, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone, because the whole point in the jury is, like, you're not supposed to know the person. You know what I mean? But everyone knows the president. You'd have to find someone that literally lives under a rock and does not know who the president of the United States is. I mean, I bet there's someone, right? Do you think there's somebody alive on Earth?
You could easily...
Or alive in America. You think there's someone in the country that's, like, you know...
like, mentally deranged people.
No. But, like, someone that's sound of mind, over 18. Someone that could serve on a jury that does not know who the president is.
No. There is not that person.
But there's 300 million people, you know?
Still.
I feel like there's got to be one.
Wouldn't be all that biased. Like, even when the trial of Trump went to the Senate, Mitt Romney voted to impeach him against party lines. And he's, like, one of the only people to ever do that. And I feel like some Republicans, I don't necessarily know, but I would imagine that some Republicans might have also voted to impeach him, regardless of...
I think a few, yeah.
I turned Stop It into a Magic the Gathering card, if you want to hit present and present again.
Alright. Here we go.
Okay. I hope Stop It is still watching. If he's not, we'll show it to him next stream.
Lord of Cessation. When Stop It, Lord of Cessation enters the battlefield, target player not gain life, cast spells, or win the game until Stop It, Lord of Cessation is removed from the battlefield. Not a leaf falls, nor an insect chirps. Not a heart beats without the Lord's say-so. Jason Bellerin. Nice. That's pretty funny.
There you go.
Wow. What an honor. Officially a Magic the Gathering.
Yeah.
But yeah, so... we were saying about, like, impeachment or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's good that the government does it. I don't know. I kind of like that. Because I feel like it would be just too difficult to find an impartial jury for something like that. So, yeah. That's all I really have to say about the Sixth Amendment.
Yeah. I think we're good.
All right. Seventh Amendment. So, this is... let me just read it. It's sort of... I don't really know much about it. I feel like it's I don't really know what it does much. So, okay. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed, get this, $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. So this is about civil suits, not
So
like
it's just preserving the rights of a jury.
when
Like
it's
Yeah.
when it exceeds $20.
Yeah. So you automatically get a jury if the thing in question is
In a
$20.
lawsuit.
I wonder it's probably never been adjusted for inflation, right?
No.
So like back when they created the Seventh Amendment,
Yeah.
$20 for a crime was probably
Here.
like a lot.
I can
imagine-
check. It was created in 1789.
Yeah,
So,
I don't think you'll
doing
find one that goes
conversion.
back that far. But let's just
I could find one that goes back.
I think I think it's like a times 25 multiplier, I would say. So that's like $500. That would be my
Yeah.
$500. So
That's
yeah, but
not a bad guess.
the $20, yeah, you get a jury. So this is basically saying it's not just criminal cases. It's not just like murder and stuff. It's is somebody, do they get the money? Do they get the money?
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Oh, you were almost
see.
right on it. $20 in 1789 is worth $588 today.
Ah, okay. So that's even more. Wow. Yeah. Oh wait, didn't I feel like I don't know why. I feel like this might not be true, but didn't like California or something? Didn't they pass a law that said that you can like steal $1,000 from a store, like up to $1,000, and they can't do anything about it?
What?
Wait, what are you talking about?
I saw
Hold
because
on.
I was in California.
California's stealing law.
Yeah, $1,000.
They define the crime as petty theft.
Okay.
As taking someone else's property when the value of the property is $950 or less.
Okay.
So I feel like that might be different than other states. That they might have changed it.
Wait. I gotta check because I remember just laughing about it because again I said I don't know if this is true, but
Because that seems like a little high for petty theft. $950.
Yeah, they could steal something $900 like on a daily basis, and then they wouldn't have any felony charges.
Yeah. Here, wait. Yeah, Proposition 47. California's Proposition 47. I don't know. Whatever. It's irrelevant. So yeah, I just thought it was funny. Let's see. Where were we? Oh yeah, Seventh Amendment. I don't really have much else to say about this, unless you guys.
Yeah, the jury.
Yeah,
the jury.
Jury. Zach, I feel like you'd have more insight on this.
I mean, you can have a jury. There
Okay.
you go.
Seventh Amendment.
Jury.
Yeah.
It comes from the habeas corpus.
Mhm.
Like it was a tradition for all trials to be done fairly with jury. So.
Mm-hmm. All right.
They want to make sure that doesn't change.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go to the next one. Eighth Amendment. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So that's the no cruel or unusual punishment thing. Also, excessive bail. But the question is, what counts as excessive bail, and what counts as cruel or unusual punishment? You know what I mean?
I would say the Scarlet Letter counts as cruel or unusual punishment.
What, the book? Wait, what's the book about?
Yeah, having to read the book.
Oh, having to read the book. Okay.
Punishment.
I would say some recent pop music would count as cruel and unusual.
Cruel or unusual is just anything that doesn't follow like the
anything weird
for punishments.
Yeah,
I would say. Like I've heard of people having to give speeches in public about like a crime they committed, and that was ruled as being a cruel and unusual punishment.
Well, that's just unusual. It's a little strange.
Well, it could be cruel.
Anything is unusual until you do it enough.
I mean,
Quote.
I don't know. I feel like
Yeah.
having to pay a fine if you steal something, even the first time that happened, that probably wasn't an unusual punishment.
Yeah, that's true. I jest.
He jests.
He jests,
Guys, he
yeah.
jests.
Well, anyway. So the other thing is about excessive bail is a question. I think New York recently did a big bail diminishment thing. Like they made bail a lot lower, or like almost zero for some crimes. They did a big like bail reduction.
Yeah, New York bail reform.
Yeah, you guys are near about that.
Overhauled, limiting the number of crimes. It limited the number of crimes for which judges could set bail.
Okay.
So,
I remember right after this law got changed, like some guy got arrested 3 times in one day, like for carjacking, like for trying to steal a car, and he got arrested and then released every time. So some people were not happy about the law, but the law was sort of trying to respect the Eighth Amendment, I guess. You know, they were saying this bail is excessive, so we're reducing it. But again, that's why it's a debate, because what counts as excessive? You know what I mean? Because excessive bail for like a Jeff Bezos type could be like a lot of money. You know what I mean? But excessive bail for the average citizen or even someone below average, like wealth wise, would be a lot lower. So it's interesting. But you don't want to apply different laws to different people, so it's a bit too subjective. But I don't know. I wouldn't quite say too subjective, because as we see with the Seventh Amendment, saying $20, that is pretty objective, but it's sort of become outdated. So if you have something too objective, it becomes outdated, but something too subjective, and it becomes like wishy-washy. So who really knows? It's interesting. That's law.
Robert Durst received a bail of $3 billion.
$3 billion. Is he a guy that has $3 billion?
Real estate guy. I don't think he has. It doesn't look like he has $3 billion.
Okay.
At that point, that's just the judge being like, you know what, money?
Yeah.
Oh my god,
he was a
funny.
millionaire, and they reduced the bail based on the Eighth Amendment.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that is a bit excessive. But yeah. Also, bail is sort of, the whole thing about bail is like, are you going to commit a crime again if we release you in the meantime, I guess is supposed to be what it's about. So bail tends to be, say, higher for like a violent crime, like murder or something.
Is that dude's name Titus Oates?
I don't think so. I think that's a Latin phrase that means something.
It better be, because if that dude's name is Titus Oates, he might end up becoming a magic card.
He's the English priest that fabricated the popish plot.
Oh,
or maybe it is his name.
I thought it was just something in Latin.
To kill King Charles II.
Okay.
All right, Titus Oates.
We talked about King Charles II in the Newton episode. Wow.
I
can't believe he tried to kill that dude. Anyway, Eighth Amendment.
Oh, Titus Oates created a conspiracy theory and accused 22 people of assassinating Charles II. And then he had to...
Wow.
Meanwhile, Charles II is still alive.
My
to this day.
I call to the stand.
To this day, he's alive.
Oh
my god.
Anyway, that's all I really have to say about the Eighth Amendment, unless you guys have anything you would like to add.
No, but Titus Oates, his soul is mine.
Well, I am going to go to the next slide, which is Ninth Amendment. The enumeration.
Do you think turning Titus Oates into a magic card counts as cruel or unusual punishment?
I think it does.
Yeah.
Anyway, The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. This basically says that the Constitution isn't meant to be an all-encompassing document. It's not supposed to outline everything that is or isn't acceptable, and everything that it doesn't comment on is not something that should be violated essentially as a right of the people. Um, which is it's pretty interesting because if the Constitution commented on everything, right? Like if it said like, oh, here are boat docking laws, like it would just be ridiculously long, and I think one of the big like benefits or just a really good thing about the Constitution is that anybody can really read it. Anybody can just pick it up and, I mean, if they can read, but anyone, like, it's a very simple document. But basically, because of its simplicity, it sort of allows people to say, like, I don't know, violate someone's rights that are obvious. I just can't really think of one right now. But, like, just some obvious right that the Constitution doesn't comment on. And if the person says, hey, that's unconstitutional, without the Ninth Amendment, people could just say, no, it's not. The Constitution never says that I can't prevent you from purchasing water bottles, right? And so someone could say, like, anyway, so that's why the Ninth Amendment is in place, so that you can say, hey, you are violating the Constitution because it is my Ninth Amendment right to do X. So.
Yeah, Hamilton basically said this in the Federalist essay, that, he was worried that the Bill of Rights would limit it, so then they threw this in there.
Oh, okay. So this was...
Now it doesn't limit it, so...
This was an appeal to Hamilton.
Sort of. And to people that were worried that the document would just, like, be everything there was to it. Mm-hmm. Same thing with, like, some of the clauses in the Constitution that we talked about on the last episode.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, well, that is, I definitely see the Ninth Amendment as a very important one. So, yeah, I'm glad that they put that in there.
It's very similar to the 10th Amendment.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes it gets a little confusing, but...
well, I mean, the idea of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's basically trying to reserve rights to the people, not limit them. And in the 10th Amendment is basically reserving powers to the states.
Yeah. But yeah, well, is there anything else you have to say about the 9th Amendment before we move on to the 10th?
9 is a good number.
All right. Well, yeah, I don't really have much else to say. This is just basically a sort of give the people the benefit of the doubt clause, kind of. It's like, whenever you have the opportunity, if it's not specifically mentioned, err on the side of liberty, which is a pretty American sentiment. So, yeah, let's move to the 10th Amendment. So, here we go. 10th Amendment, it's about states. So, powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So, yeah. Again, so pretty similar. What do you think about this, Zach?
This one is sort of the idea that we are ultimately a federal system, and the power has to be shared between the central government and the states. I think an interesting thing about the 10th Amendment is how America is really one of only a handful of countries that have anything like this at all, because there just simply aren't that many federal countries, and it creates instances in which laws can be sort of conflicting, either in different states or between some states and government. So it kind of makes it like a legal mess.
Definitely. A lot of American, like, if you watch any political dramas, American, like, the system just seems seems like if you are, say, the president, it seems like you got to wrangle with like all the governors and stuff. It just sounds so annoying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm.
But I think it's sort of good because although it may slow things down, it also, I would say, probably affords more liberty to the people. Um, just that. But yeah, like the president, definitely as president, you have to wrangle with all the governors and you have to worry about like, are they going to be cooperative with you or not? And often that comes down to like party lines. So it just sounds like a very difficult position to be in. I mean, yeah, being the president, it just sounds too stressful, honestly. I would not want to be president.
All right, we have Titus Oates.
All right, let's.
I have
I'll hit escape here. Titus Oates, sinful priest. When Titus Oates, sinful priest, enters the battlefield, target player searches their library for up to one card named King Charles II, English chap. Destroy that card. Lamau, this dude's name is literally Oates, Thomas Jefferson, Independence. All right then. Well, that is Titus Oates.
Titus Oates, everyone.
So Zach, are there any examples of the 10th Amendment in practice?
There are tons. Think about any driving laws, any like sort of specific alcohol regulations. Like I know Connecticut used to have this strange rule that said you can't buy alcohol after 5 p.m.
Yeah,
the
South
second Sunday of
Carolina
every
still
Tuesday or
has
something.
that law. You
Huh.
can't buy alcohol after 9 p.m. in South Carolina, I'm pretty sure.
Interesting. Yeah, and the states used to have like different drinking ages. Like some had like 19 or something. Uh, but it's all 21 now because the federal government, they basically passed a law that said if you want interstate highway funding, your drinking age needs to be 21. Now, I criticize that. I don't think that's
Some
a good law.
leverage.
I don't think that's a good law because it sort of like skirts around the 10th Amendment. Because if the
Yeah,
federal
I think
government were to mandate a drinking age, it would people would say that's unconstitutional. But they sort of weaseled it in. And like, how does drinking age have anything to do with highway like funding? You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
I am sort of critical of that law. I don't think that's a good law. I think it should be repealed, because
yeah.
it sort of forces their hand. It forces the states to do something. I would argue, well, it doesn't directly violate the 10th Amendment. That's like the whole reason it was passed, essentially, to sort of subvert the 10th Amendment. So I don't know. I don't like it. But yeah.
I
Also,
think the 10th Amendment is like actually one of the most powerful amendments, and it's often overlooked. But if you look at the Bill of Rights and you imagine what would happen if any of the amendments did not exist, like obviously if the Third Amendment did not exist, there would be no change.
yeah.
But I think even if the First Amendment wasn't included in the Bill of Rights, some of the rights would probably still be protected.
Yeah.
But the 10th Amendment, if that wasn't included in the Bill of Rights, I could easily foresee a future where the federal government just basically did away with the states.
Yeah, definitely. The 10th Amendment is really important in sort of how America acts as a country. I mean, even recently with the COVID, like with the pandemic response, there hasn't really been much. There's been like federal suggestions, but there hasn't really been much of a federal response. It's mostly been a state. I mean, there's been a bit. Like they've had the bailout and the free money, essentially. You know what I'm talking about? The free money, like I forgot how. But mostly it's been a state thing. So like California, when I was in California a few months ago, they had like a mask mandate for like stores and stuff. So every store had to require masks, otherwise they'd get sued. Here in Florida, they don't quite have that. A lot of stores mandate masks anyway, just because they want to, but you don't actually have to by threat of fine. Another thing is like New York, the state of New York, Connecticut and New Jersey too, actually. This has sort of become a bit of a problem for me, is that they have like a 14-day waiting period on Florida So if you're from
Yeah.
Florida and you go to the tri-state area, they will like make you quarantine for 14 days or they'll fine you, whereas like other states don't have that kind of a law. But it just sort of makes it difficult because, I still have ties to Connecticut. So occasionally we need to we have business operations, just to be very technical and vague, that we have to attend to in Connecticut. So that makes that sort of difficult. But if you look at other countries, if you look at, British response, French response, German, all the European nations have more of a unified response within their borders to the coronavirus. Like if the government of Britain says lockdown, everyone locks down. You know what I mean? But in America, the government can't quite do that uh, because partially the 10th Amendment. So it has to be the states that decide that. Um, so yeah, that's sort of the 10th Amendment. That's sort of how it applies today.
Yeah, I agree that it is one of the most powerful ones because I think it kind of goes into what America is kind of about, like the whole dual federal versus states thing.
Yeah.
That is partially unique.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that's all I have to say about this one.
One last thing on this slide. If we move Titus Oates,
yes,
take a look at the map.
I'm sorry.
Notice that
yes.
Mississippi's flag is missing, right?
Yes, we intentionally. Mississippi's flag is not actually missing. The concept of Mississippi's flag is not a thing. There is no flag of Mississippi currently.
There is no Warren Bossing say.
Oh,
no,
I didn't see
the two finalists from. Shall I put the image in?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
I guess that means that my design has not been accepted.
Maybe not. Yeah, we talked about this in the vexillology episode. But Mississippi, they removed their flag, and I don't think they're going to get the new one until the election in November. So that's why we omitted Mississippi. But it really isn't an omission because they just don't have a flag. So it's not like we're omitting it.
That's true. So the two finals are on the next slide.
All right, let's see. That's nice. That's pretty nice.
Definitely
nice. Yeah.
I'm leaning towards the. I like the second one without the gold bars. I don't like the gold bars.
The second one is a little cluttered, but yeah, I think it's definitely the better one.
I like the second one because of the magnolia or whatever, the flower.
Yeah.
But the river on the top one is.
That's true. Nice. That is a nice touch. That's what mine had on it.
Interestingly enough, the top one based their design off of a Mississippi state coin, 1790 something. But on that state coin, they spelled Mississippi wrong.
Oh,
that's rough.
Oh no.
Anyway, one of these flags will be the flag of Mississippi. That's pretty interesting. But yeah, so that's it for the 10th Amendment. I shall move on to the next one.
The state flag is the 10th Amendment.
What? What do you mean?
The state having the right to make their own flag.
That is true.
There you go, 10th Amendment right there.
Something else interesting, I would say, is the states should be allowed to decide their own time zones, but they aren't. It actually needs federal approval.
Max and his time zones.
Yeah, I was hesitating saying that as soon as I said there's actually something else, because I knew Sebastian was going to give me flack for talking about time zones again. But I will just say Florida passed a law, and a ton of other East Coast states. The Florida law is called the Sunshine Protection Act, and what it would do is put us on permanent daylight savings time, also known as Atlantic time. So we would be like an hour ahead of New York, like an hour ahead of Eastern time during winter. And that law actually passed the Florida legislature. It just didn't pass the federal one. So I think that the 10th Amendment, I think we should have our different time zone. I think this is the violation of the 10th Amendment.
Wow, you should get a lawyer.
You know me.
Rudin versus Florida.
Nah, it would be Rudin versus... Or it would be Florida versus the United States, wouldn't it?
I guess, yeah. No, I guess it would be.
Anyway, that is neither here nor there. I can have.
So that is the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
So
So
those are the
yeah,
10
So
so
most
now
now-
we're going into like the speed run amendments, the not so
Yeah.
important ones.
Yeah,
Except
now
some
we're-
of them are actually.
Except for the slavery one.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
okay. I'm going. So other than the Bill of Rights, there were 5 amendments before the year 1900. We just artificial arbitrary designation. We just wanted to cut these in half. But 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th. The 13th through 15th amendments, I think they were called, what were they called? I think they're collectively referred to as like the progressive amendments or something like that because they were the amendments right after the Civil War.
13th through 15th is the Reconstruction.
That's the word I was.
And then the
Yeah.
16th through.
Well, that gets that's like
19th is progressive.
okay. Oh, okay. So
Progressive
that's
is
the
later.
progressive ones. So these are the Reconstruction because they were passed in the Reconstruction period. But before we get to those, there are 2 amendments that come first, and they were very early on. So the first one is the 11th Amendment. The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state, or by citizens or subjects of a foreign state. So what that means is that while I can sue Florida, you guys cannot. You would be violating the Constitution. And while you guys can sue Connecticut, I cannot. Well, maybe. I don't know. Because it depends on the residency thing.
Yeah.
But in principle, say I lived here like 100%, were no other residents. But anyway, I mean, we do pretty much live here. It's just we also own a place in Connecticut, so that's sort of, although we're trying to get rid of it, but it's coming. Anyway,
Yeah.
so the headline I put here was Florida man sues Georgia, violates U.S. Constitution. And the original story behind this amendment is actually pretty similar, except it was a South Carolina man, 2 of them, 2
Of
South Carolina
course.
men. They sued Georgia. I forget why, but Georgia, let me just say, they were not happy about getting sued by some South Carolinians. And so,
Carolinians.
yeah, Carolyn. So this, in large part, is what spurred this amendment to be passed. I forget the year it was passed, but I know it was before 1804 because the 12th Amendment is 1804, and this has to be so between 1791 and 1804. But yeah, so I
Yeah.
don't know what you could say. What year was it?
I could check if
Oh,
you
okay.
want. Here.
I think there's one legacy for this amendment.
Yeah.
And I would say that is dealings with Native Americans.
It's in
Because if you follow the Constitution in the
1789.
11th Amendment, you should have to treat Native Americans as a foreign entity. You shouldn't be able to sue them, and they shouldn't be subject to regulation from the government.
Okay.
But of course, that is not what ended up happening.
Or actually, it was 1794. Sorry. Go ahead.
It's interesting that no one really challenged the government on this, even though they easily could have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is an interesting amendment. It feels pretty niche, but it sort of makes sense. Like, you know, what business do I have suing Missouri? You know, like, I forget the case exactly. Do you know what the case was? Where why were the South Carolinians suing Georgia?
I can check.
I don't remember that one.
Sue Georgia.
But yeah, this is
Chavis v. South Carolina. No, it's not it.
so. This makes sense.
In Chisholm versus Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
In 1793.
Okay.
Which makes sense because it was made
exactly.
in 1794.
Okay. So what were they suing over?
They were suing, going through it, for unpaid debts that Georgia incurred during the War of Independence.
Interesting. Yeah. Um, hmm. Well, that
Just
wouldn't
an
really.
absolute mad lad sues
Yeah.
the entire state of Georgia
Yeah.
for unpaid
Yeah.
debts.
So that's it. Well, wait. Were the debts unpaid to him? Because.
No,
Oh, okay.
I don't think so.
Okay. So that kind of. I don't know. The 11th Amendment, it kind of makes sense. But on the other hand, I feel like if someone had genuine grounds for a lawsuit of a different, they should be able to file it.
Well, under this case, they actually did rule that the federal government would get jurisdiction between
Yeah.
the dude and then the other
Okay.
state, not the state that he resided in. The 11th Amendment was created to sort of nullify that.
Okay. Interesting. Well, anyway, this is just sort of highly specific, but I don't know.
Yeah.
All right.
The next one is also to relieve a loophole.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. So this is a really long one. Do you want me to read it? I can read it, but I feel like
I think we should not read this one.
this is just a very long one. You can look it up and read it if you want. It's like, but it's pretty simple, really, to explain. So, up until the election of 1800, portrayed here, the way that the president was elected, and we talked about this in the Constitution episode, the president was elected by, well, electors. So what you would do is you would vote, and then your state, whoever won the state would get the electors. But the way that it worked was each elector got 2 votes. So they would pick their 2 favorite people, and then the person that got the most votes would be president, and the person that got the second most votes would be the vice president. So in the election of 1788, that was a problem because Washington rules. Everyone voted for Washington essentially. 1792, again, everyone wanted Washington. Then 1796, Adams beat Jefferson. And so this is where 1796, I would say, operated pretty well, in my opinion, because, I think it was like, what, the Federalists against the Democratic Republicans or something, because Jefferson was a Democratic Republican, right?
Yeah.
So it sort of made sense because you had the president being of one party and then the runner-up was the vice president of the other party, which could lead to like discourse, or discord within the executive office. But it kind of makes sense, it feels representative of people. But the problems came in 1800 where Jefferson ran again against John Adams. And so this is a thing because, it is sort of weird to have the former vice president run against the former president in the next election. Also, at this point in time, the position of vice president was pretty useless. Like, it didn't really do anything as vice president. So it wasn't really that important if they were of different parties. But 1800 was basically a big problem, the election, because so the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists. So the Federalists, well, what they both did was they both decided, okay, we are all going to vote for our favorite, Democratic, Republican, or Federalist candidate, right? But when it comes to the vice president, all but one of us is going to vote for the same guy for vice president so that we can win both seats instead of having the other party get the vice presidency, because you don't want that. If you can have both positions, you might as well try and take them. And so the Federalists, they had 63 votes for John Adams, 63 votes for 62 votes for a potential vice, and then 1 vote for just another random person, sort of a throwaway vote, intentional throwaway. So if John Adams had won with 63 votes, the intended vice president would have been runner-up with 62 votes. But unfortunately, they did not get enough votes. And instead, Jefferson got 73 votes, and his vice president, Aaron Burr, also got 73 votes, which was a problem because they were tied. And so that meant that neither technically had more of a claim to the presidency, even though the Democratic Republicans had intended for Jefferson to be the president and Burr to be the vice president. So then it went to the House of Representatives, as is the policy for a tie. And so it went to the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives eventually picked Jefferson over Burr. Burr was never a U.S. president. But it could have gone the other way, and that was concerning for democracy. You know what I mean? Because you don't want the guy that they want to come in second to come in first. So what they did was they passed this amendment in 1804. And so what this amendment did was it said instead of one elector voting for two people in one large pool of presidential candidates, you would have one pool of presidential candidates and another pool of vice presidential candidates. So the elector would have one vote for president and one vote for vice president. And whoever won the presidential pool would be president, whoever won the vice presidential pool would be vice president. And so that replaced the old system where they were messing about with whatever, right? So this is pretty interesting because it means that technically an elector could vote for like one party's president and then the other party's vice president, although they wouldn't do that because that would be sort of career suicide as an elector because they wouldn't want you to be an elector anymore. They would be like, what are you doing, dude? You just betrayed us. But yeah, so that sort of changed the system. So the 12th Amendment was pretty important, I would say, because if it was never passed, you would still have these crazy controversies. Also, you would have things like you'd have, say, Trump would be president and Clinton would be vice president right now, if you didn't have a 12th Amendment because she was runner-up. And so that would just sort of be weird, because that would also be with every administration, essentially. Now that it's sort of a two-party system, it's sort of odd. I think the main problem was that before the 12th Amendment, the presidential system, like the system for voting of president, worked pretty well outside of a two-party system. But the two-party system slowly formed, and once the two parties were sort of solidified, even though the parties have changed, like there are no more Democratic Republicans or Federalists, but I think that, we had to switch to this new system to work better within a two-party system. I think that's sort of how it is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I would say this is pretty important. Because also, if you watch the play Hamilton, and it's on Disney Plus now or whatever, this is the election of 1800. They say is what resulted in the duel between Burr and Hamilton. Although that's not actually true. The duel actually occurred in 1804 because Burr was running for governor of New York and like failed miserably, and he thought it was because of like Hamilton in the press was sort of slamming him. So yeah, but they sort of took that liberty in the play. But that's sort of where you might know about this amendment from, if you have any idea about it. But yeah, so there's not much, application of the 12th Amendment. This is more of just a structural thing, you know what I mean? It's not like you're violating my 12th Amendment right. Like, what does that mean? You can't, it's not a right. It's just how the government works, So, so it's not much of a controversy. It doesn't really come up a lot. So that's all I have to say. You guys have anything else?
No, I think you nailed it.
All right.
12th Amendment, pretty important. Next one, also kind of important.
Yeah, 13th Amendment, 1870, I would guess, somewhere around there.
Wait,
1845.
What?
Do you not know when slavery was abolished?
Not 1845.
Yeah, you just said 1845.
1865. Try that.
I thought it was 1845.
No, the Revolutionary War occurred.
Oh, no, you're right. 1845 is the other thing.
What, for, I think, Britain.
What other thing?
The other thing.
Britain abolishing.
The annexation of Texas.
Okay. Well, I was closer than you were when it comes to...
Okay, that's very true, but I knew it ended in a 5.
All right. Well, anyway, the 13th Amendment. Here, wait, let me read it. Because I think this one's shorter, right? Maybe it's shorter. Yes, it is shorter. Okay. Uh, Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. And then Section 2, Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. I am going to leave out Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation because it's pretty much tacked on to the end of like every amendment after this one, which is basically saying this amendment has the power to be an amendment, which is just like, yes, okay, we get it. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
but but the key thing here is, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude is permitted in the US. So that's, abolishing slavery is the 13th Amendment. So, I mean, obviously the ramifications are pretty obvious here and pretty big because slavery was legal in the U.S. and, that was a violation of human rights. And there was a whole civil war fought over it. And so this amendment sort of solidified the Union's victory. It's sort of saying, we won, we are getting rid of slavery because it is immoral. Um, so, yeah. And then something interesting, though, is that I have heard people criticize the part here where it says except as a punishment for crime, because slavery or coerced labor is still technically legal. Convicts in prison are often forced to work, and they're forced to work for like wages that are far below minimum wage, like $1 an hour. And so that's coerced labor. They're forced to do that. And so people have said we need to update the 13th Amendment and get rid of the crime part because, some like prosecutors and stuff, like you don't want there to be an incentive to keep people in prison, essentially, is what I'm saying. The government, this is sort of the argument. The government shouldn't be making money off of prisoners, off of their cheap labor, because then it'll incentivize them to keep them imprisoned, which, if you want like an impartial system, people should only be imprisoned like because of the crime they've committed, and because they're dangerous to society. But allowing prison labor sort of incentivizes you to sort of like look the other way if like new evidence comes up, you know what I mean? So yeah, so there's been some flack there. Also, this this sort of accept as a punishment for a crime part was especially uh, egregious right after this amendment was passed in the South. In the South, they passed a few laws that made it illegal to be unemployed, essentially. So then a ton of people were unemployed, and then they would be convicted and then put into coerced labor. And so a lot of people that were former slaves, they couldn't find work, and then they ended up becoming enslaved again, just like by the government through the prison system. So yeah, so the 13th Amendment, uh, huge accomplishment for abolishing slavery, but also does have some potential weaknesses within it for allowing slavery in certain instances. So yeah.
Mhm.
There you go.
Yeah. Anything you guys have to say about this? Anything you'd like to add uh, about this amendment?
Important.
Well, sharecropping sort of also functioned as slavery by contributing to the amount of people that were then in prison, forced to work. And I think if you look at the 13th Amendment along with the 14th and 15th Amendment, you can easily argue that they didn't do enough to support newly freed individuals because even 100 years after the 13th Amendment, they were still fighting for civil rights.
Sure.
And they still are today. So
yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting. It's like you like to look at it as such an accomplishment as it is, but also there are always, I feel like nothing's ever perfect. There's always some issue. So yeah, I mean that's why the Civil War was fought, and won by the Union in 1865, but major civil rights violations, like the civil rights movement, was really active in like the 50s and early 60s. So it took like, yeah, as you said, 100 years for them to like really make some like substantial ground like to end segregation. So yeah. Um, yeah, so that's it for this amendment. Shall we go to the next slide?
Yeah.
All right,
Yep.
14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment is pretty long. Do you want me to read it all? I don't think I should read it. It has like 4 sections. It's longer than the 12th.
What's the summary of it?
Well, so it has stuff like the naturalization, so the birthright citizenship thing, where anyone born in the U.S. and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, although that part has become like irrelevant. So anyone born in the U.S. essentially is a U.S. citizen. Um, so technically, it's like unless you are like if you're not subject to the U.S.'s jurisdiction, but you're in the U.S., then technically you shouldn't get citizenship according to this amendment. But that part is often ignored. So it's really just if you were born in the U.S., you get to be a citizen, which is actually pretty rare, I would say. A lot of countries, their citizenship laws require either that one parent or both parents even have to be citizens themselves. Like the nation of Qatar, I believe, in the Middle East, uh, to be a citizen, both of your parents have to be citizens. So there are a lot of people that are like permanent residents but aren't citizens. Um, and yeah, I can't imagine Europe has a birthright citizenship. I think birthright, like just being here, is sort of unique to the US. And it is partially related to slavery because I don't think the slaves were considered US citizens like while they were enslaved, because obviously then you would have citizens being denied rights. So once they were freed, they had to be given citizenship. And the way they did that was by saying, if you were born here, you're a citizen. Um, so I think, and then there's also you can apply for citizenship. So I think that's sort of what that's sort of why they included birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment also this is interesting. 14th Amendment also guarantees equal protection under the law for all citizens, and uh, now the language of that is how segregation sort of came to be by sort of using a loophole. If you've heard the phrase separate but equal, uh, the equal part in that is supposed to say we are like as the South could pass segregation laws and say we're not violating the 14th Amendment because it's equal, it's just separate. But they were not very much not equal anyway. So they said they were, but if you like actually looked at things, the accommodations were quite different. So segregation was pretty bad, and it was a loophole that used the like vague, I guess, languaging, wording of the 14th Amendment to sort of get past it, essentially. But the 14th Amendment was supposed to pretty much bring about equality, but it just didn't quite cut it, essentially. So yeah, this was also passed like late 1860s. These were all sort of passed together. Any other ramifications of the 14th Amendment, Zach? Those are the two main ones I have.
I think it sort of is an important justice because, or it's an important amendment because of how heavily it prioritizes justice, and along with like due process of the law,
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely a very important legal amendment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and another thing we didn't really say about the Reconstruction amendments, the reason these amendments got passed is that after the war, military districts were established in the South, so they didn't get to vote.
Yes.
on
True.
them, so
Yeah, that's sort
that's
of
why
how
they were.
that's how Lincoln got like reelected or something, was because when the South left, they forfeited their like votes and
Hmm.
representation. And so once the Union won the war, they didn't readmit them as states for a while, so they were able to just get some more laws because they didn't have the Southern opposition. So yes, that's
Hmm.
true. But yeah, I don't really have much unless you guys have anything. I'm just gonna go to the next slide.
Yeah.
All right. So next slide. 15th Amendment. Let me see if it's readable or if it's just too long. 15th Amendment.
I feel like this one's readable. I don't
Oh yeah,
remember it being
definitely.
that
Okay,
long.
okay, here we go. 15th Amendment. The rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Note the absence of gender or sex because that will be the 19th Amendment, so that will come later. And then Section 2, the redundant one, the Congress, blah, blah, blah. So this is an interesting one because, again, 1870, this amendment was sort of weak because, again, the loopholes. Pretty much like there's so much, if you look at these amendments, so much of like this like segregation period in the South was a result of basically these amendments being too vague or the South finding loopholes around them. So one of them was uh, the like ridiculous, you may know about these, the ridiculous like voting tests where people would have to take these like impossible tests to be allowed to vote. Like they would have to, it would be like stupid questions that nobody could really answer, like intentionally difficult to answer. But what they did was they said that to vote, you either need to pass this test or your grandfather had to be able to vote. And so the result of that was that in the South, all of the like white people essentially were able to not do the test, but then African Americans had to do the test and they couldn't pass it because no one could pass it. I think in social studies in eighth grade, they had us do it and like nobody passed it in our class because it was just ridiculous. Um,
Hmm.
but basically, because that test and the like law about like your grandfather or whatever, because that's not technically a designation by race, the southern states were able to get away with it for a while because they weren't technically violating the 15th Amendment, which is a ton of that's pretty much all of the bad stuff that the South does in the early 1900s is essentially just we weren't technically violating the Constitution, even though we were very much trying to. That's sort of how it goes. So that's interesting. Yeah. Do you guys have anything on this?
Mm,
Another important one. Progressive.
Yeah.
Voting Rights Act, almost 100 years later, would
Mhm.
probably seal the deal, make it
Yeah.
Yeah. Cleared
outlaw
up the
some of the
loopholes.
loopholes. Yeah.
Yeah. They also there's an amendment against poll taxes, which comes later. But yeah, so that's the 15th Amendment. Let's continue. So post 1900, this is again our arbitrary cutoff. So now we get into the progressive amendments, whereas those past three were the Reconstruction amendments. Um, so yeah, post 1900. So these are more recent, past 120 years. Um, and some of these might surprise you, actually. Some of these, like, laws that you would think of, or not laws, some of these amendments, like, some of these states of America, like, that you would think of as not having ever been different, like being everlasting, have actually changed just fairly recently. So let's dive right into it with the 16th Amendment. And so this is something that might surprise you. So let me read it for you guys. Okay. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. So this is federal income tax. Yeah, until whatever year this was, 1913, I believe. Until 1913, the federal government actually had no income tax. There was a 0% income tax, you could say. Um, Income tax was not constitutional. You could not levy an income tax until the 16th Amendment. Now, income tax federally, I don't know exactly, but I know the tax brackets. It goes from like 10% to like 37%, depending on your income, because it's a progressive tax rate rather than a flat tax rate. So it proportionally charges you more the more money you have. Um, but let's see. But yeah, so the 16th Amendment is it's really interesting because the amendment was like uh what's the word? Like it wasn't actually proposed because again, so William Howard Taft, he was the president. He was important in getting this amendment through because he wanted a 2% federal income tax, which oh, could you imagine? 2%. I just find that so funny. Because the intent behind this amendment was to levy a 2% income tax, and now income tax, probably for the average person, is somewhere around 20% or higher. So it's like 10 times worse than the intention, which I just find really entertaining. Like another thing is that the laws, like the taxation during the American Revolution, like the taxes on tea were like pretty low, but they revolted over it. So it's pretty interesting that we're actually taxed a lot more now than we were during the Revolutionary time period, although now we have at least representation. So it's not taxation without representation. So, yeah, but anyway, I digress. Before this, the government raised money by tariffs on imports and exports. I believe they were able to tax, was it interstate commerce?
Yeah,
Yeah.
commerce, and then they also got money from selling land.
Okay, so yeah, so they would claim land and then sell it. But by 1913, the last, well, not the last, but the 48th state, Arizona, had been admitted in 1912. All that was left was Alaska and Hawaii, so not much more land to sell. So it kind of makes sense that they needed a new source of revenue. I believe they also had sales tax, right? Before this?
But that was states.
Okay, so the states, there's no federal sales tax, is there?
I don't think there's federal sales tax.
Okay. Yeah, so that's interesting because I've heard arguments from some people saying that we should get rid of income tax and replace it with a federal sales tax, which would be just an interesting concept um, because it would tax, like, you could tax luxury items specifically instead of just people that make more money. Because the argument is that a family of seven, you know, on a family of seven on say $100,000 a year isn't going to be doing as well as a family of three on $100,000 a year, and the family of three is probably going to be spending more on like luxury items, whereas the family of seven will be spending more on like basic goods like food. And so the income tax would charge them both the same, and that might not be fair, essentially, is sort of one of the arguments. So then a sales tax, national sales tax, would tax like what they buy. So you could tax like basic goods like food at a lower rate than luxury items. But that is not the system we have. So yeah, 16th Amendment for income tax. I find it interesting that that just wasn't a thing. That just wasn't a thing until 107 years ago. So and now like everyone's like, oh yes, nothing's what is it? It's nothing's inevitable but death and taxes. Uh,
Yeah.
Income tax wasn't always inevitable. So, yeah. So that's interesting. But yeah, so I don't really have much else to say about this. I think, what was it? I think income tax was raised pretty significantly by Franklin Delano Roosevelt for the New Deal, to like get people to get out of the Great Depression. So I think that might be where a lot of the tax hikes originated, where it sort of went from 2% and really blew up. Because the New Deal was pretty expensive, just, because it was a huge, like, overhaul, ton of, like, farm subsidies, I believe. Or no, wait, no. The farm subsidies were what caused the Great Depression. But anyway, it's a whole thing. it's a whole thing. So 16th Amendment, that's what that is. I don't have anything else to say on this one.
Taxes. Thank you.
All right. 17th Amendment. So the 17th Amendment changed how senators are elected. It's a longer. Should I read it? It's a few paragraphs. I'll just explain.
No, you can explain it fairly simply.
Yeah. So previously, up until the 17th Amendment, the way that senators were elected was different from House of Representatives from congressmen. So the congressman would be elected by the people of the district just by like simple majority, say, whereas the senators would be elected by the state legislature. So you would vote for state rep and state senate, and then the other it would be the people. So yeah, but they changed that. I don't know the exact year. After 1913, before 1919, because I know where the next amendments were ratified. But this essentially changed the game for Senate. Let's see, what else I'm trying to think. I guess you could say this sort of weakened the power of the states because the states could no longer actually pick their senators, although it's still the people of the state. So it's sort of like a murky, what do you consider the people and the state, like the people of the state? It's weird. But what am I trying to say here? I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm blanking.
It gave more power to the average person.
Yeah, definitely.
Made it more democratic. Definitely.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember something else. I can't exactly remember. Oh, yes. Also, another part of this is that it formalized what to do when there's a vacancy in the Senate. And what that is that, like, the governor can just sort of appoint a new senator, and then there has to be a special election sometime shortly after to make sure that, like, the proper person. So the senator can be appointed, but only for a short period of time, not a full like 6-year term. There has to be a special election in between there. This is a map of the 2020 senatorial elections, and if you look at Georgia, Georgia has a S, and that S is for special election because they have a special election. Because someone resigned from the Senate, and so then the governor of Georgia appointed a new person temporarily, and then they're having a special election. So that's the 17th Amendment in action, you know? So that's cool. But yeah, so that's all I have to say about that. Unless you guys have anything, I will go to the next slide.
Yep.
All right, next slide. Bam, 18th Amendment, Prohibition time. So this is 1919. This is leading into the Roaring Twenties. This is like the Great Gatsby setting. So this is pretty interesting. Then the 20s were a really interesting time period. And I feel
they're
like
my next decade that I have to cover.
Yeah, and I feel like the next 20s are going to also be an interesting decade. I mean, they're off to a really strange start, I would say.
Yeah.
2020s. But yeah, so the 18th Amendment is interesting. It was for temperance. And yeah, I mean, it's strange, but there was a time where 2/3 of the country, I guess, wanted alcohol to be prohibited. So let me read it. It's actually kind of, well, no. I'll read the first section. After 1 year from the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within, the importation thereof into, or the exportation thereof from the United States and all territories subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited. So it's just like no alcohol, possession of alcohol is illegal, drinking it's illegal, exporting it's illegal, making it's illegal. Just everything. No alcohol. It's prohibition. So, yeah. So it's pretty crazy because I would say America has like a strange alcohol like culture.
Yeah.
Like you kind of can't say to, I don't mean you can't say, but like for some reason, in sort of like American work culture, if you're to say to your colleagues, "Oh, let's like just hang out or something," people would be like, "That is weird." But if you're like, "Let's go for drinks," that's always what you got to say, you know? Like everyone wants to go for drinks. Um, so that's just so strange, you know what I mean?
Mm.
Um, so now the idea of prohibition now is sort of unthinkable because everyone, not everyone, but like it's just so entrenched in the culture. You know what I mean? To go out for drinks is like a thing. So alcohol is pretty prominent in American society. So this amendment just seems so strange, I guess, to most people. Um, but yeah, it really gave the 20s that like 20s vibe. That is, you know, perfectly encapsulated in all these 20s books. But uh, but yeah, I don't know why they did this. I think it was a religious motivation, I believe, was a lot of it. Like, I don't know why they did this. I don't know why they did this.
Why?
Like, it was a strange moral, like, it was a moral thing. It was out of virtue. That was all.
They
It was
they
all.
wanted to reduce crime.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
that's
it
interesting.
totally backfired. They
Yeah,
they they created crime. Like
exactly.
Al Capone basically
Hmm.
emerged from the 18th Amendment
Yeah, all the
and
bootleggers.
started bootlegged. Yeah,
Yeah, all the alcohol was bootlegged, and so yeah, they created more crime by criminalizing alcohol. Um, what else? It's sort of like I'm trying to think of something here.
there's gonna be a sequel to the 18th Amendment.
Oh yeah,
The
yeah,
sequel everyone wanted.
yeah, exactly. Um, but yes, the 18th Amendment. Also, well, yeah, in 1919, it's interesting that sort of. I'm not sure. I bet this played a role, but I don't think it was the main thing. Is that cars? You know, I mean, the Model T was what 1908, right? The Ford. Um, so you know, this is only a few years after. So 1919, like the end of the 1910s, is sort of when cars were becoming increasingly popular. And so I imagine there were a ton of like drunk driving incidents, you know, a ton of DUIs when cars were just first becoming a thing. And so that could have been motivation for some people to get rid of alcohol. Also, look at this beautiful typo in this old newspaper: Wyoming, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. No space. Um, but yeah.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah. So what else? What else? Yeah. So yeah, this amendment would eventually be undone. That's a few amendments later. But we'll see that a bit. Also, it's interesting. You could draw a parallel, I suppose, between this and like marijuana. Although there was no amendment to make marijuana illegal, um, a lot of people are probably saying there should be one to make it legal. So like a 21st Amendment for marijuana. Although, what do you think? I feel like it's more likely that it would be a judicial thing that would decide it. Because a lot of states have independently like decriminalized marijuana, although it's still illegal federally. I'm not sure on the laws of that. I'm not too well read on that. I don't really have much of an opinion on that, I would say. Um, Other than just a personal opinion of like not to use drugs or illicit substances. But um, but yeah, so I don't know what the situation is on that front, on the law front. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, so that's if you guys have anything you'd like to say about that.
Like federally banning the alcohol,
Hmm.
like it completely backfired and stuff.
Yeah,
But um,
yeah, and so that's like the
I
main
want,
argument for legalizing marijuana is sort of like the
yeah,
basically how
and that
prohibition.
argument also goes all the way back to the gun thing, like
Ah, yeah.
the a common argument used for pro gun stuff is if you outlaw guns, only
Hmm.
outlaws will have guns.
Yeah.
So I feel
Yeah.
like that plays into it.
Yeah, because basically the 18th Amendment resulted in a lot of crime from like this underground alcohol industry. So today there's probably I would say there's a lot of like gang violence probably because of marijuana and stuff. Usually heavier drugs, I think. But
Yeah, there's not really too much gang violence over weed.
I'm not very educated in this,
Woke.
but I don't really know much about this. But I know that there's a lot of, it's the, whatever, it's the thing. Uh, it's that, what they did to alcohol in the 18th Amendment and the results of that is sort of what's currently happening with marijuana. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But yeah. So.
All right. Yeah, I think we could go on to the next one, which is women voting.
Yeah, 19th Amendment. Let me see. I think it's a short one. I will pull it up. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. And by sex, they mean like gender, biological sex, not like sexual intercourse. That is basically to give women the
virgins can't vote, those losers.
Exactly. This is for votes for women. This is the 19th Amendment passed in 1920. It gave women the right to vote. It's pretty simple, I guess. But again, a lot of these amendments are surprisingly simple, but at the same time, they are also very important. You know what I mean? They're like simple things, but just because they're simple doesn't mean they're not important. Like, breathing is simple, drinking water is simple, but they're important. So, so this gave women the right to vote, 1920.
It's been like 100 years.
Yeah, actually, they had some like events this year about the anniversary. And they were lucky because they were able to hold these events essentially before the COVID came, because the amendment was ratified in January of 1920 or something. So they were able to have some events about this. This is like women's suffrage. I think recently.
Go on.
I was just going to say,
it's important.
Yeah, definitely. I was gonna say, I think recently, Trump like posthumously like pardoned like Susan B. Anthony or something, who was a big suffragist leader. So that's pretty cool. Because she was like arrested for illegally voting, and she didn't actually live long enough to see the passing of the 19th Amendment, but. It's pretty cool that, all this work essentially from a lot of people. I mean, civil rights, suffrage, it's pretty inspiring that these people were able to fight for such an important cause and win, essentially. So, so now it's in the Constitution.
Yeah. The Museum of Susan B. Anthony said that they do not accept the pardon.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know why, but
that's tough.
All right then. Then I guess he shouldn't have pardoned. I don't know. Whatever. Politics. Blah blah blah. Whatever. I don't have any. I don't know. I do not know. That's all.
He doesn't know.
I just don't know.
This man doesn't know.
I am just sort of confused, I guess, that her museum wouldn't want her to be pardoned. I don't know. I'm just
whatever. The 20th Amendment.
Exactly. Yeah. 20th. Here we go. 20th Amendment. Or you could say the January 20th Amendment. I'm not going to read this whole thing. It's too long. So this amendment basically says the president will be inaugurated on January 20th unless it's the Lord's Day, in which circumstance it will be January 21st. So every, inauguration for a very long time has either been on the 20th or the 21st. And the reason they did this is that Inaugurations had been occurring on like March 4th, around there for a while. And that's because the election would take place on, you know, the first Tuesday in November, right? And so imagine you are Mr. 1800s presidential candidate, right? And you get elected on, right, no, like early November, okay? It'll
Hmm.
it'll and say you live like, in Maine or in Georgia. You are quite a long way from Washington. And so, someone has to take out, bring the horses and spend like a month or whatever, like getting the news to you that you have been elected president. And then you need to take a month to get to Washington. And so everything was just slow in the transportation front. So that's why there was such a big time delay between the election and the inauguration. But as technology advanced, transportation technology advanced, and people were able to travel quicker and news was able to spread faster. It didn't really make sense to have the inauguration on March 4th anymore because it resulted in a lot of like a long period of lame duck presidents where they're like, oh, I'm here, but I was voted out of office and now I'm here for like 6 months. So they wanted to cut down on that. So they moved it back to January 20th because people were able to travel faster. So that's a pretty simple one. So it's pretty long. So I don't know if there's any other things in there that Zach wants to talk about, but that's the main thing as far as I was aware. So
Basically, like further cleaned up the election
okay,
process. And I think that's further elaborated on by the 25th Amendment.
okay, yeah. So we got four pictures here. Each is from the first inauguration of each of these presidents. And all of these pictures were taken on January 20th because of the 20th Amendment. So that's why I put these pictures here. Um, these were the last four presidents. Uh, you probably know that. That's probably unnecessary to say. Shall I go to the next slide?
You shall.
Thank you.
Beer.
21st Amendment.
Beer.
Control Z. So, let me read this. So Section 1 pretty much explains it all, but then it continues, but I'm just going to read Section 1. The 18th article of amendment to the Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed. So that pretty much says everything right there. It's a control Z. It's an undo button. They're like, yeah, that 18th Amendment didn't go over so well. Let's get rid of it. And so they did in like 1933. And yeah, you see these people protesting for the noble cause of beer drinking. They wanted beer, as their signs say. So the 21st Amendment ended the age of prohibition. It ended the 1920s like gangster like alcohol stuff. Um, Interestingly enough, it's like America fell into the Great Depression in 1929, and I feel like that was partially responsible because everyone they were in financial stress and all their woes. People tend to turn to things like alcohol in times like that. So people wanted that not to be illegal. Uh, Interesting. It's sort of like how in the COVID lockdowns, uh, a lot of liquor stores have been deemed essential services, essential businesses, right? And that's sort of funny. Like, how are liquor stores essential businesses? Do people need alcohol? And so it's just kind of funny that this you can sort of see this back during the Great Depression, and it's still like a thing today. So yeah. So yeah. Do you guys have anything on this?
Beer.
Okay. Zach, do you have any commentary? Or shall I go to the next one?
Nah, next one.
Alrighty then. 22nd Amendment. So the 22nd Amendment is pretty long, but I'm not going to read it. I'm going to explain it. So the 22nd Amendment said that a person can only be president for 2 terms, and if they if a vice president is elected, or not elected, but if they become president more than halfway through a term, their first term doesn't count. So it's like round to the nearest whole number of terms, and 2 is the maximum you're allowed, essentially. So this came in response to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was elected for 4 terms in office, but only ended up serving about 3 because he died like a month into his 4th term. And so something like when he was getting elected for a 3rd term, like one of the slogans was this pin right here that says, "Washington wouldn't, Grant couldn't, Roosevelt shouldn't. I'm against a 3rd term." So the whole 2 terms thing really comes from George Washington, who he could have served a 3rd term. He was popular. The people liked him. They would have probably reelected him if he ran, but he wanted to retire. He's like, "I'm done. I'm done. I'm leaving." And so then he had the farewell address, and that was that was a pretty important speech. Zach, I think you talked about that last time.
Yeah.
And so Washington, he could have served more terms, but he didn't want to. Like, he thought it to be noble, because if you think about it, the concept of a person leading the country until their death seems very king-like to me. You know what I mean? So Washington sort of cemented the fact that no, we are not a nation, like we are not a monarchy. We transfer power. So he only served 2 terms. And then up until Franklin Delano Roosevelt, every other president also only served 2 terms. And I think that's equally as much out of respect for Washington as I imagine it's just a really stressful job, you know what I mean? And I feel like after 8 years after 8 years being president, I feel like most people will just naturally be like, "Oh God, I am done. I cannot handle any more of this nonsense," right? But Roosevelt was able to, I guess, and he was suffering from polio, so he was, I guess, able to do it. But people have criticized him for it, because, and he was president for 12 years, which is pretty crazy. But basically, the fact that he did this sort of spurred on the 22nd Amendment, and so the 22nd Amendment, it didn't apply. The 22nd Amendment was ratified after Roosevelt died, and so it didn't apply to Harry Truman, who was vice president of Roosevelt, but Truman didn't run for a 2nd term or for a 3rd term anyway. I'm not sure if I think he served 2 terms, but yeah. So Truman, while he could have served for longer, because a lot of these amendments, right, when they change something, they don't want to change the rules on someone already president. You know what I mean? That wouldn't be fair. That would sort of violate the Constitution, even, because the Constitution says no ex post facto law. So they were sort of respecting that principle by sort of saying, okay, this takes into effect when the next person becomes president. So since Truman, the guy after Truman, I don't know who was after. Was after Truman? Was it Eisenhower?
After Truman.
Yeah, it was Eisenhower.
Okay, so yeah. Since Eisenhower, no president has been allowed to serve for 3 terms. Although, I'm pretty sure Donald Trump has made joking comments about serving a 3rd term, but that would be unconstitutional. He could not do that. He would not be allowed to do that. Nor is anyone that has served 2 terms of presidency. So Obama, Bush, 43, Clinton, they could not serve as president again. Even if they were somehow able to get elected, they could not serve again because they have already served 2 terms. So yeah, that's the 22nd Amendment. So yeah, let me go to the next slide unless you guys have anything on this.
I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
All right, 23rd Amendment, DC vote. No taxation without representation. Yeah, That was a license plate for Washington, D.C. for a while. So let's see. Okay, so this is a little long, but basically what it says is the 23rd Amendment was passed because originally, like when Washington, D.C. was founded, very few people lived there. It was just where the government resided, but everyone else like lived outside of D.C. It was only the people that were serving in government that lived there, so you really didn't need to worry about their right to vote. But at the time that this amendment was passed, D.C. had a population of 700,000 people. So this was in the 60s. Now D.C. is around 500,000, so it's a little bit lower. But there were 700,000 people in D.C. that could not vote. And that was becoming an increasingly large problem to people. They were like, what? I could live 30 minutes away in Maryland or Virginia and I could vote, but in DC I can't vote. What's the deal with that, right? So what they decided to do was they didn't want DC to be a state. The problem is Washington DC isn't a state, so it didn't get any votes in the Electoral College. So in writing this amendment, they still wanted to make sure DC wasn't a state, but they wanted to allow it to vote for president. So they're like, how do we do this? And so the way that they decided to do this, say, if DC were a state, the number of electoral votes it would get as a state is the number it should get as a not state. So it is not a state, but for the terms of presidential elections, it shall be considered a state, essentially. It'll act like it's presidential elections, but it's still not a state. So that's what they did. So DC got 3 electoral college votes, which is the minimum, and that's what they currently have. That's what like Wyoming gets. Wyoming has a similar population. So the DC, they get 3 electoral votes, and if you're looking at an election map on like election night, don't forget about DC. I mean, they're probably not going to swing any elections, and I think they're not a state, but they're a safe state, I would say, for like the Democrats. They usually give their votes to the Democratic candidate. So DC probably isn't going to swing anything, but it's important. It's important. That's the thing with DC. Now we're going to talk about proposed amendments later, but the thing with DC sort of seems like Puerto Rico. People might be considering about Puerto Rico, but we'll talk about that later, because Puerto Ricans cannot vote for president, similar to Washington, D.C. before the 1960 amendment. So another thing D.C. gets is they get a non-voting member of Congress. So wouldn't that be a fun job? You just sit there all day. You just sit in Congress all day. You don't get to vote in anything. You just sit there. Maybe, I don't know, go on your phone. No, you can't go on your phone. I imagine it would be kind of boring. You just have to sit there all day and you can't, do anything. I wonder if they're even allowed to...
Can you introduce legislation?
Oh, maybe. Maybe he can introduce legislation.
Yeah, I mean, what else would he be doing?
I think it's actually a she right now.
Oh, she, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, though. But I would find it funny if the DC person isn't even allowed to talk. They just have to sit there. Just like if I were writing like a sitcom or something about Congress, like they would just intentionally they're not allowed to talk. They just have to sit there and do nothing. Like that would be a running gag.
Yeah, that's Julia. We don't let her talk.
Yeah, that's Julia. She represents DC. She can't talk. So she's not allowed to.
She's allowed to talk.
Okay.
She spoke out against the stuff they're doing with the Postal Service.
Okay.
And
in Congress or outside of Congress? While it was in session?
On House floor, yeah.
Oh, okay. So she is allowed.
And she sponsored a bill.
Okay, so that makes sense. So I think she's just
they got to be able to do something.
So she pretty much gets to do anything another person can do other than vote. So that is pretty interesting. So that is actually more significant because I hadn't thought about that, and I thought the DC person just sat there doing nothing. So the DC person does actually do stuff. So that's pretty interesting. So I think the 23rd Amendment is what added that. I think Puerto Rico has a similar situation. Like they have an observer. Maybe not. Maybe I'm thinking of something. Maybe I'm thinking of like Vatican City in the UN. I do not know. But that's the 23rd Amendment. So I have nothing else on this one. Shall I go to the next slide?
We shall.
We shall. All right. 24th Amendment. 24th Amendment got rid of the poll tax. Let me just read this here. The right of citizens of the United States to vote in any primary or other election for president or vice president, for electors for president or vice president, or for senator or representative in Congress shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state by reason of failure to pay any poll tax or other tax. So the poll tax was another type of thing that was sort of like a cheat, like around the 14th Amendment, because it basically, by charging people to vote, it sort of would be like adverse to like socioeconomically, like to poorer people that couldn't afford the poll tax. And I think during this time period, it was African Americans and other minorities were more likely to be like in lower socioeconomic statuses, so they were less likely to be able to pay the poll. So they sort of like, it's one of these things that's like discriminatory, but doesn't technically violate the 14th Amendment. So they had to pass the 24th Amendment to get rid of it. So no poll tax. If you show up to the polls on election day and they say, pay up, you can say, nah, that is illegal. You cannot do that. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Anything on this one, you guys?
Taxes.
All right.
Beer?
No, that was the 21st. All right, I'm just gonna go to the next slide and then you guys.
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay. So 25th Amendment. This is an interesting one. I would say of the later amendments, it's referenced more often. Like, I think it gets a bit more traffic as an amendment. You know what I mean? It's kind of long. Yeah, it's pretty long. I'm not going to read it. But what it basically does.
Give us the 128 seconds.
Yeah, so it allows. It formalizes things like the line of succession, and it allows people to be acting president. And so here's how it does so. So it formally, I always confuse formerly and formally. Formally, it says if the president dies, the vice president. Pretty self-explanatory, and that's how they had been operating before, but like it wasn't written explicitly. So they put that down explicitly. But what they also do is they say that if the president is like feeling sick, the president can write a letter to the Speaker of the House and the President pro tempore of the Senate, and that letter can be like, yo, I'm feeling sick. I'm a dip out for a little while. And then when that happens, the vice president becomes acting president temporarily. And the vice president will continue to be acting president until the president writes 2 more letters again to the speaker and the pro tempore saying, yeah, I'm all right now. So, yeah, so that's one part of the 25th Amendment. But the other part of the 25th Amendment is a little more, it's a little more risque. It allows the vice president and a majority of the cabinet. If the vice president and the cabinet, like if they call a meeting and the majority of the cabinet votes to get rid of the president, they can. So a letter signed by the majority of the cabinet and the vice president, if they send that letter to the speaker and the president pro tempore, then the vice president can assume control and kick out the president. Isn't that crazy? So while people always think of impeachment as like the only way that presidents can be removed from office, there is this like 25th Amendment route where the cabinet members would sort of launch a coup against the president. And so this is interesting. I mean, if you think about it practically, though, it is highly unlikely that the cabinet that the president himself appoints would get rid of the president. You know what I mean? If the president appoints people that would willingly get rid of him, then I imagine he was a bad president in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you can't even pick people that won't get rid of you, maybe you should be gotten rid of. You know what I mean?
There you go.
So yeah, but so instances where this has been used in the past, it has never been used in like a coup way. It has never been used in a takeover way. It's always been used where the president uh, goes into surgery that requires anesthesia, and they are like unconscious, during the operations. The vice president gets to be president for 3 hours, essentially. Um, or maybe a few more days if the president needs to recover. But uh, often, actually, a lot of like, I think it was like Reagan, Bush, a ton of presidents have invoked the 25th Amendment because they needed a colonoscopy. So that would be you get to be acting president for like 3 hours because there really isn't recovery needed from that kind of operation. But it's also been used when Reagan, for instance, was shot in 1981 by the crazy like simp guy. You know that dude?
Yeah, he did it for Jodie Foster.
Yep, he did it for an actor, which is just pretty interesting.
John Hinckley Jr.
Yeah, exactly. The ultimate simp.
The ultimate simp.
So yeah, he shot Reagan, and then Reagan, Reagan survived, and went on to be president for 8 years. But while he was in surgery and a little bit while he was recovering, they invoked the 25th Amendment so that the vice president would be acting president so that, nothing went awry while the president was in surgery. So that's the 25th Amendment. Pretty important because I would say in the modern world, there are a lot more instances where the president might be temporarily out of service and you need to, have someone be the president, because in the past, as the world used to move slower, without the internet really, and without phones, because, so this is going even further back, you didn't really need the president to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If the president's unconscious for a few hours, that's all right. Nothing's really that pressing. But now things definitely are that pressing. So if the president has to go into surgery, you need the vice president to be able to take the reins for a few hours. So that's what the 25th Amendment does. And it also has that revolutionary coup thing where if the president is deemed mentally unfit, they can just get rid of him, which is pretty crazy. Because while the impeachment, to convict a president on impeachment, requires 2/3 of Congress, it only requires a simple majority of the cabinet. So that's a little spooky, backdoor way to get rid of a president. So, yeah, that's the 25th. All right, I will go to next.
So, real quick. The president,
yes.
The president is incapacitated. So is the vice president.
Okay.
So is the Speaker of the House. Okay. So is every single other person in government.
Okay.
How many people does it take until I legally become the president?
There is no precedent for that. The line of succession. So I actually thought of doing an episode on this, but the line of succession goes, president, vice president, Speaker of the House, president pro tempore of the Senate, and then all of the cabinet secretaries in order of the creation of their department. And then that's it. But yeah, people have criticized that because if, for instance, Washington, D.C. were to be nuked, there would be no president because all those people work in Washington, D.C. I don't know. At that point, the way to become president, think about it. If all those people...
if all those people are incapacitated, who's going to stop you?
That's what I'm saying. If all those people are simultaneously, assassinated or something, the way you become president is in the inevitable, chaotic disorder that would result from all those people being assassinated. So there would be no legal way to become president, but it would be the law of bigger army. So that's how you would become president.
Anyways, 26th Amendment.
26th. All right.
This one we can cover in one sentence.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this is, here, I got the text here. The rights of citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of age. So if you're older than 18, you are old enough to
You
vote
can vote.
no matter what, and you can't be discriminated against on the basis of age. So this was passed in 1971, and
Because of the Vietnam
yeah,
War.
it came after the Vietnam War because the Vietnam War had mandatory. It had the draft. It had conscription. A few calls were made throughout the Vietnam War, and so a ton of people between the ages of 18 and 21 were called to fight, and unwillingly were called to fight because of the mandatory draft. And so a lot of the states had laws that said you had to be 21 to vote. And so people would, fight and die, but they had no representation. So this was egregious, essentially, because you're sending people off to fight and die.
Sorry.
They can't. Yeah, it's fine. And they can't even vote on whether or not a draft should be put into place. So this was a pretty important amendment. And it's strange to think how recent it is. Like some of you watching this may not have even known about this, and if you had, like, I was under the impression it occurred, this 26th Amendment, I was under the impression it occurred a lot earlier. But no, just as recently as 1971. So that's just like 45 years, or no, sorry, 50 years, 49. We are 49 years post 18-year-olds being allowed to vote. So that's really fascinating. Now people have proposed 16-year-olds should be allowed to vote. I don't know about that.
Hell no.
I am 16, and I fully endorse denying this. I don't know how to say that. Exactly, I don't know how to say that.
You fully oppose
I fully oppose this.
You negate, if you want to use debate lingo.
There we go. I oppose the resolution. Yeah, because, listen, I'm 16, and I do not think I am qualified to vote, nor do I think, no offense to anybody that is of our age range, but I am not impressed. I am not impressed. I don't think. I don't think we're mature enough to vote.
Old enough to vote.
That would probably be the new slogan. But actually, in New Jersey, you have to be 17 to actually get a driver's license. New Jersey has the oldest driver. So there isn't even consistency there.
That's why all their drivers are so bad.
Also, in South Dakota, you can drive at the age of like 14 years and 6 months. So there's inconsistency there. But yeah, I am against a 28th Amendment for 16-year-olds. I just idea. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say. Although for some reason everything becomes a partisan thing, so please do not get mad at me on partisan lines about this. This is not about partisanship. This is about the judgment of 16-year-olds, of sophomores and juniors in high school. You know what I mean? So, of people that are financially dependent on their parents. You know what I mean? It just does not seem very smart. But I digress. That's the 26th Amendment. Now, let's go to the 27th Amendment, unless you guys have anything else you would like to add.
No, I'm good.
All right.
I gotta run for dinner at 8.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see if we can finish these.
I hope you get elected.
Last 7 minutes.
Yeah, I do. I hope I get elected for dinner.
Anyway, 27th Amendment. No law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. So I put this funny meme picture of Obama giving himself a medal that, has been used in a lot of memes, because basically, up until the ratification of this amendment, Congress could theoretically just give themselves a pay raise like the next day, which, doesn't really seem very fair. In what job are you allowed to decide your own salary? You know what I mean? So this amendment was put into place to say that any law you make about your salary won't take effect until next term, so that if the people aren't happy with you giving yourself a $1 billion salary, they can vote you out, essentially. So that put a nice little check on things. Although most, it wasn't particularly egregious before then either, because people didn't want to tick off the electorate, So, but anyways, it's important. And actually, the 27th Amendment was important enough that it was included in the original Bill of Rights. Yes, this is one of the two amendments that did not make it into the Bill of Rights. This was the original Second Amendment. So all of the current Bill of Rights is shifted 3 later. So the current First Amendment was originally the Third Amendment. The Second Amendment is the Fourth Amendment. And so this was the 27th Amendment was originally going to be the Second Amendment. But it took 200 years for it to pass. Crazy. But it finally did. So there's that. Anything you guys have to say on this one?
Nope.
All right. So that was the last amendment. Now we're going to talk about proposed amendments. So these are just some propositions. I mean, they're in various stages of ratification. Some aren't even proposed at all in the House, but they have been proposed by me. So there we go. These are just potential things that could be amendments, is what I'm saying. So we got the original First Amendment. The original First Amendment, as I talked about the 27th Amendment, this was going to further outline the size of Congress. So the Constitution says Congress, or the House of Representatives, should be proportional with the populations of the states. However, it says that you can't have more than one congressman per 30,000 people. However, the original First Amendment was going to say once we got to 100 congressmen, the law should change that you can't have more than one congressman per 40,000 people. And then once we get to 200 congressmen, it should be that you can't have more than one per 50,000 people. That was the original amendment. I don't really know why. It wouldn't really have much of an effect today. But it is interesting that it would only take a simple majority of Congress to pass a law saying that there could be 10,000 congressmen. And the reason for that is that there are 300 million Americans, and the U.S. Constitution says no more than one congressman per 30,000 Americans. So we could have 10,000 congressmen, but the House of Representatives, they would have to vote themselves into that situation. The current law that says that it's going to be 435 always, the 435 number is just a law. That law can be overturned by simple majority. It's not an amendment or anything. So that's interesting. Anyone want to call their congressman and tell them to promote a 10,000 congressman bill? That would just be an interesting social experiment. So yeah, So that's the original First Amendment. Anything you guys have to say on this one? All right.
Obama.
Athens had more representation than we do.
Oh, we're not even on Obama. Never
Wait,
mind.
who has? Oh,
Pardon me.
Athens. Athens.
Ancient Athens.
Interesting. Yeah. All right. So Puerto Rico voting. So Puerto Rico has a population of 3 million people, but they can't vote for president. So I think it would be pretty smart to do a sort of like the 23rd Amendment, what they did for DC there, they should sort of do for Puerto Rico. So they shouldn't necessarily make it a state, because that's a debate. Some people want it to be a state, but some people don't want it to be a state. But for the sake of enfranchisement, for the sake of people being allowed to vote for president, maybe they should do the same sort of it's not a state, but it'll get the same number of votes as if it were a state. Because a population of 3 million, I think the population of I think that's higher than the population of a lot of states. Like Wyoming only has half a million people. There are a ton of states that have less population than Puerto Rico, so it doesn't really make much sense that Puerto Rico can't vote. So that's an amendment. What do you guys think about this one?
I like this one.
Yeah.
I think it's only fair.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it does bring into question the other U.S. island territories, like the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, but those have significantly lower populations, like in the tens of thousands. But this is like
I wouldn't
3
give it to
million
them
people
until
here.
they met the basic population requirement for becoming a state.
I would say any territory that exceeds the population of a current U.S. state should become a state. I think that's probably a good metric.
Yeah.
So anyone that surpasses Wyoming should become a state. But it's, or maybe not a state, they should, because, you know, D.C. has more than Wyoming. But more of a...
All right.
Oh, yeah, we'll see it.
I made Joe Biden...
Oh, you're gonna head out?
I made Joe Biden a magic card.
Oh, you made him a magic card.
This is not political.
Okay.
There you go.
Where is it?
It's on Puerto Rico.
Joe Biden, Dem nominee. Joe Biden, Dem artifact screech. When Joe Biden, Dem nominee, enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life for each blue card on the battlefield. Listen, Jack, I've been, you know, where I went, there's 2, no 3, and that's why it is. Joe Biden, Dem nominee. That's pretty funny.
Well said, Joe.
Well said.
The weird thing is the territories get to vote in the primaries.
So, that is extremely weird. Yeah.
Like, didn't Bloomberg win like American Samoa or whatever?
Yeah, that's crazy. That's interesting. But yeah, so Puerto Rico voting, I think it would be a good idea. I don't know. But of course, it's a political issue and also probably a partisan issue. But if I remember correctly, I think that the parties are flipped on this one as opposed to the votes for 16-year-olds thing. So I've balanced it out. I'm all good. I'm all good, guys. I have maintained my neutrality. You know what I mean? Because my opinion on this one is opposite on partisan lines for the opinion on the other one. So that's great. So yeah, I am a neutral person, okay? Switzerland. So that's an amendment. So let's go to the next one. This is the last one. I think we have one more after this one. So this is the Equal Rights Amendment. So the amendment would say equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. So I'm a little confused about this one because I feel like it's redundant because of the 14th Amendment, right? The 14th Amendment says equal protection under the law. For all
some
citizens.
people, I guess, are there things added in the Equal Rights Amendment?
I'm not sure. Maybe this isn't the full thing, but I'm just a little confused by it. I don't think I really know enough about it to really make much of an opinion, so I'm just going to tell you guys about it. It also has... there was something called the Equal Rights Act in 1964, and that was a big, that was Kennedy. Kennedy wanted the Equal Rights Act, but then he died, and so then it was passed by Johnson.
Yeah. It seeks to end the legal distinctions between men and women in matters of divorce, property, employment, and other matters.
Okay.
I guess the divorce part and the property part
that does make sense.
Important, because alimony and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I could see that.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
But I don't an entire amendment seems.
Yeah.
Well, but we would have to do more research, so we would have an informed opinion.
But this is one that has actually been proposed in the legislature. So it's been in the legislature, and recently it's been in the news because when it was proposed to the legislature, they put a time limit on it and said if it's not passed by this point, get rid of it. And so the time expired. So yeah, so that's a thing. But yeah, so. But if you see the ERA, the term ERA, that was in the 60s when people if you see ERA, yes, there were similar protest signs in the early 60s for the Equal Rights Act, you know? So it's interesting. It's like a historical parallel. People were talking about the Equal Rights Act, and the Equal Rights Act got passed, but the other ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, has not gotten passed. So that's just an interesting one. Anything else on this one, you guys?
Nope.
Okay, I will go to the next and final. So this is popular vote for president. This has been particularly controversial in the 2016 election because Donald Trump won the Electoral College, but not the popular vote. So people have been unhappy about that. This has occurred a few times in like the history of presidential elections, and we're doing a whole episode on elections, like right before the election, so we can get into that later. It'll be fun. It's scheduled for the Sunday before, voting Tuesday. We're going to talk about every presidential election, all 58 of them. So that'll be fun. But yes, the popular vote for president is pretty simple. It's just the concept that, like, every vote would count as one vote instead of like the convoluted electoral college thing. But opponents of the popular vote, I mean, again, for some reason, it's a partisan issue again. Again, with all these things, partisan issues. But one side says it's about like protecting the small states and the rural vote. Because like the urban centers or whatever, like the rural populations are overrepresented in the electoral college, whereas the urban populations are underrepresented in the electoral college. So that's sort of the issue for the popular vote. Something interesting about the popular vote is that it would actually make it worth it to like campaign in California or Texas. These are pretty like safe states for Republicans and Democrats, but making a popular vote would make it worth it on both sides to actually campaign in these places because because the thing is, California is going to vote Democrat. So if you're like a Republican, and even if you're a Democrat, there's no point campaigning there because if you're a Democrat, it's not like you're going to lose California there. But the thing is,
I feel like that would be such a power move to campaign in all of your opponent's safe states. I feel like that would like freak him out.
Roosevelt doing that.
Yeah. Oh, he would definitely do that.
Exactly. So the popular vote thing would make it worth it to do that because if you go to, say, like Los Angeles, even if say that you're a Republican, right? Say that you're a Republican campaigning in Los Angeles, even if 80% of Los Angeles or whatever is going to vote for the Democrat, if you convince like a dozen people, that's worth it. You know what I mean? And if you're the Democrat too, even if 80% are going to vote for you, getting just that bit more to vote for you is also worth it. So the popular vote would sort of incentivize like visiting everywhere because right now it's like the most attention is put on the swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, Arizona a little bit even. So a lot of these swing states, they get, I think Ohio actually as well. A lot of these states get more attention because each election they're pretty close. So a popular vote for president would incentivize campaigning everywhere. But then, of course, on the other hand, it's the electoral thing, and the electoral thing was intentional. So it's all it's a debate. It's a nasty political debate. So we're just trying to be neutral here. But if you talk about popular vote stuff, you can get into some pretty severe arguments. So yeah, so that's it. Do you guys have anything more on this?
Beer.
All right. Wait, is it illegal to vote while drunk?
Oh.
Voting under the influence? No, exactly. It's not illegal. Although I would say it's not a good idea either. But anyways, let's go into final thoughts here. Final thoughts.
Yeah. The Constitution, important. Amendments, also important.
Yep.
Sometimes I think about writing amendments, but then I go to sleep.
Then you go to sleep. Yeah, it would be interesting to see some more amendments. There hasn't really been an amendment recently. I think when was the 27th Amendment Act? Was it the 90s?
I think it was the 90s.
Yeah, so
I'm calling one within the next 10 years.
Ooh, wow, he called it.
27th Amendment.
I think it's gonna be some sort of budget, hopefully.
Think so?
In 1992.
You think it might be like a balanced budget amendment or something?
Yeah, or I don't know.
Yeah, anyway, so amendments, there have been a lot of amendments to the U.S. Constitution because, it's a living, breathing document, as the cliche goes. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool that the founders worked in that it should, like, they worked in a definite sort of set way to amend it because otherwise, if Article 5 of the Constitution didn't exist, I mean, we'd be stuck with the old Constitution, and I don't think that would be a very good world. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
presidential elections would be confusing, like with the tied votes and stuff. I mean, slavery would still, unless they passed laws against it. I don't know if they could pass laws, but they wouldn't have an amendment against it. Voting rights wouldn't be secured for everyone. So the fact that the Constitution is able to be amended is very important. Otherwise, it probably would have been overthrown by now, and a new document
Yeah.
in place. That's what happens. I think France has gone through like 6 governments, like in terms of constitutions and stuff. Like they've gone through, I think they're on like the 6th republic or whatever. They've gone through 6 republics since America was founded, because around the same time, French Revolution, since the French Revolution in 1790, whatever. So, yeah. But anyway, so I think it's very good. It's very good that we have these amendments. I think it's interesting to look through these amendments. I think it's just so fascinating, some of the things that are just staples of modern society that weren't always exactly how they are. And I think it's exciting to see all the possibilities for future amendments. I just think it's such a cool subject. So, yeah. That's America's Patch Notes.
Good episode.
Yeah, so that's all I have to say. I would like to thank Zach for being our guest today, for helping us finish off our little 2-part mini series on the Constitution. Thanks for being here. And I would like to thank Sebastian for being my co-host always. And I would like to thank you guys for watching. So, yeah. Unless anyone...
we have Stop It. Stop It's back. Hold on. Stop it. I don't know if you saw, but I made a magic card out of you. Here, I'll put it on the final thoughts.
Yeah.
All right, show it to him. Stop It says, I want a constitutional amendment to abolish Switzerland. Enough amendments, get it right the first time. That's fair. Yeah. Stop It, I need you to see this, and I need you to tell me what's going on.
Yeah, thank you all for watching.
How you feel about this.
Thank you, Stop It, for watching. Stop It. What an interesting figure.
Well, yeah, what an interesting character.
So mysterious, hidden behind the anonymity of a blue personal profile picture.
Yeah. Switzerland.
Oh, he's not going to like that.
Oh, no. Don't enrage him.
Don't enrage Stop It.
He'll stop your heart.
He needs to have a multiple episode story arc, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, the investigation of Stop It.
Anyway, I think that does it for this episode.
Beautiful card, he says. Beautiful, or he or she.
They're not going to be happy when they find out. When they see what happens. Let's end the stream before that is possible. It's on a 30-second delay. All right. Thank you guys all for watching. Now I'm going to end the stream now. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
There we go. End stream. Okay.
All right.